Texas Southern University's Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research Community Engagement Core is funded by the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparity Research Center for Minority Institutions program. The CEC works directly with communities to identify and address health-related concerns and reduce health disparities related to ethnic minorities. We provide health education and partnerships with healthcare systems, federally qualified health centers, community and faith-based organizations. For more information, visit us on social media at CEC Texas Southern U or give us a call at 713-313-1233 or send us an email at cbmhrcommunity@tsu.edu.
And now introducing the Texas Southern University Jazz Ensemble. The TSU Jazz Ensemble is an award-winning ensemble and was commissioned as the official jazz band for the state of Texas. They have been featured at the Jazz Education National Conference, Texas Music Educators Association Conference, the Essentially Ellington Regional Festival, alongside many public concerts and private events. The TSU Jazz Ensemble has a rich history of many notable performers. Some of the well-known artists that have passed through its ranks include Kirk Whalum, Frank Lacey, Andre Hayward, Barry Lee Hall, and Shelley Carroll, to name a few. Some of our recent graduates include rising stars within the industry, including Melvin Johnson, Raul Blanco, Eddie Moore, Timothy Liam, and many others. The TSU Jazz Ensembles are renowned for their hard-hitting sound with both feet firmly planted in tradition and its eyes fixed on the future. And now introducing
Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. We're having some technical difficulties. Welcome to Texas Southern University Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research Community Engagement Core's 2022 Clinical Research and Engagement Conference.
All right, good morning, everybody. We are very excited to be here this morning, starting off with our second annual Clinical Research and Engagement Conference coming live out of Texas Southern University. It is our ultimate pleasure to have everyone that has joined us this morning. It is a beautiful day here in Houston, and we are excited for what we are going to accomplish over the next few hours as we have this incredibly important conversation and presentation through conference modules over the next few hours with the community. I want to say a big thank you to the leadership of TSU, to the leadership of the College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, and also to the leadership of this funded grant through NIH for allowing us the opportunity to join and be a part of this conference today. I'm going to share a few slides just to kind of give introduction of what we are going to do today before I turn it over to our amazing speakers and the panelists that will be hosting the rest of today's conference. Just one second.
Welcome to Texas.
Okay, so the Community Engagement Core here at Texas Southern University is under the Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research, which is funded by the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities Center under the Research Center for Minority Institutions Program, U54ND007605. Us as a CEC program, we want to say thank you to NIH for the support and for the leadership of our university and of the college for supporting us as we host our conference this morning. And the goals that we have within the Community Engagement Core is to engage the greater Houston community to increase awareness about clinical trials, clinical research, and to ultimately reduce health disparities to identify and address health-related concerns within the greater Houston area, and also to be able to increase clinical research participation, as well as disseminate research findings among the community. Here is the screenshot or the headshot of the team that consists of the Community Engagement Core. It's not just me, it literally takes the entire diverse group of individuals that we have within our center. Myself, I am Veronica Ajewale. I have the privilege of being the director for the Community Engagement Core. And alongside, we have Dr. Grace Loud, who is our associate director, as well as Dr. Uche Undefo, who is also our associate director. In addition to this, we have Ms. Evelyn Cassis, our project coordinator, Dr. Tonisha Taylor, social media lead, Ms. Sierra Legends, our social media graduate assistant, Dr. Morgan Cobby, mass media lead, Dr. Maria Mejia, healthcare system liaison, Ms. Lena Bean, our outreach coordinator, Dr. Asato Richards, the CBPR consultant, as well as Dr. Roselia Guerrero, who is our community training consultant. So it takes everyone on our group to be able to put this incredible conference together. And I want to say thank you to this amazing team for all the artwork that has gone into putting today's conference and to make it a success. Again, to the audience, thank you and good morning. Thank you for joining us. On this slide, you will see the agenda that we have for this morning, very engaging sessions, speaker sessions, panel presentations, as well as a couple of performances from, we already saw one from TSU Jazz, and we say thank you to them. We also have a couple of performance breaks that will be embedded throughout the course of today's conference. And we have several speakers that will be featured today. And as we go through the conference, you will be getting to know all our speakers a little bit more. We are very active on social media, so please go out to the social media and do hashtag CBMHR, hashtag CREC 2020. We are live tweeting. Please like, share, and subscribe to all our channels on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on Twitter. We are very cognizant of getting feedback from the community, so we would like to have the community members respond to a survey, which will be posted right now on the chat box as well as on all our social media handles. So please complete the survey, and in that link, you would also see some of our links that will lead you to the magazines, to our websites, and all the things that we have going on in the Community Engagement Core. We also want to connect with you by text message, so please feel free to send a text, CSU CEC, to 855-264-9031. Okay, at this point, we will get started with our first session of the speaker sessions. This morning, it is our ultimate pleasure to bring up Dr. Michelle Penn-Marshall. Dr. Michelle Penn-Marshall is the inaugural Vice President for Research and Innovation here at TSU. She previously served as the Vice President for Research, Associate Provost, and Dean of Graduate College at Hampton University, which is a private HBCU located in Hampton, VA. Our roles prior to joining TSU included Assistant Provost for Research and Grantmanship, Chair of the Department of Biological Sciences, as well as the Director of Student Academic Support Services in the School of Nursing. Without further ado, please join me, everyone within the community, to welcome our very own Vice President for Research and Innovation, Dr. Penn-Marshall. Over to you, Dr. Penn-Marshall. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Ajawale, for that very gracious introduction. It is my pleasure to be with you this morning, and I am just so proud of all of the work that the colleagues at Texas Southern University continue to do to transform our community members. I want to share briefly with you this morning some of the research that is being conducted at Texas Southern. Please understand that this is not a comprehensive list of the amount of research and educational training that is actually occurring at our beloved institution. It is important to note that Texas Southern University is one of the nation's largest historically Black colleges and universities. We are student-centered, we are a comprehensive doctoral university, and we are committed to ensuring that equality and innovative programs are offered at our institution. And we are keenly aware of our urban setting. We are a leading producer of college degrees that are awarded to African Americans and Hispanics in the state of Texas. And we rank 4th in the United States of America in doctoral and professional degrees that are conferred to African Americans. That is very important to note. The founders of this beloved institution could not have chosen a better location. You can see that we are centrally located to the Texas Medical Center, which consists of Rice University and the University of Houston, MD Anderson.
Dr. Penn-Marshall, I apologize to interrupt.
Sure.
Because your slides is not advancing.
Okay. Oh. Wow.
I think you're sharing the presenter's view instead of the full slide itself.
Okay.
So at the top, if you do the swap displays button, it should switch it to presentation mode.
Okay, because I pressed it at the bottom and it worked when we practiced. At the top, you'd like me to?
At the top of your screen, do you see swap displays right above the timer?
Oh man. I see stop share. I see new share. Pause share. Maybe I'll stop. Maybe I'll try it again. Is that better?
We still can't, we can't see the slides. I think you stopped sharing.
Are you all able to share my slides?
Yes,
This worked when we practiced.
Yes, I will go
Okay.
ahead and start sharing. Just give me 1 second.
Certainly, thank you. And
No
colleagues, I apologize.
No problem at all.
Thank you very much. If you could advance to the next slide.
Sure.
And I'll just give people a few minutes to look at it. I will not speak about it again in the interest of time, but this is the slide that I thought I was sharing, where I just really talked about the wisdom of the founders with the central location to the Texas Medical Center, and also the goals of Texas Southern University, the mission and the vision. Next slide, please. It is impossible to be transformative without collaboration and without strategic targeted interventions that are designed to address the community needs and health disparity and health inequities. So you can see by these concentric circles that grant funding and research is at the forethought. And community engagement is also something that is extremely important. And Texas Southern University is an institution that is well respected and trusted in the local community. There has to be diversity in workforce. There has to be access to healthcare. Everyone deserves affordable housing, access to healthcare, and the opportunity to be trained and educated. You will see as I talk about some of the funding that actually the faculty members and the researchers have been able to secure through their educational background and their hard work, that these circles are all intertwined and are covered through the partnerships with other institutions and corporations and the community. Next slide, please. I want to just point out some of the research centers and institutes. So colleagues, if yours is not here, please know that Texas Southern has several research centers and institutes. You will hear more about the first one that's here. I hope my mouse, I don't think you'll be able to see where I point, that deals with pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics and drug discovery and drug intervention. You will hear more about that. Oh, thank you so very much. If you could also please go down on the left-hand side to the very last one on the left, Dr. Barbie Wilson, environmental research and technology transfer. And above that, you have Center for Transportation, Training and Research. It's important that people have access to transportation, but land use is involved, and also evacuation planning so we can be safe as storms come upon us and the climate changes, and automated vehicles. So there's very comprehensive and thoughtful work that's being conducted here. And on the right-hand side, you will see that there's a Center for Climate and Environmental Justice and a Center for Justice Research, because we have to ensure that our criminal justice systems are equitable. There's an opportunity under that, and thank you, you are following me beautifully, for legal representation, research, and education. And at the very bottom, and there's another slide that talks about this, with Dr. Lowe and Dr. Solitaire, the opportunity for affordable housing. And when you're thinking about gentrification, when people are displaced, you have to place them in environments where they still have the opportunity to thrive and to live safely and not be so disruptive of everyone's culture, and the opportunity for wealth building as well. Next slide, please. Dr. Okay. The next slide, really, you're going to note that colleagues are really studying diseases that are prevalent in the African American, the Hispanic community. There is a grant, and prostate cancer, really, people do not have to die from it. So I really encourage our community members to take your partners, your husbands, your brothers to be screened for prostate cancer. And you can see here, and this is actually one of Dr. Ajawali's many projects, but it's an aggressive prostate cancer study. And it's in collaboration with Houston Medical Cancer Center. So I talked about how centrally located Texas Southern was. It's going to take everyone to eradicate health disparities. Next slide, please. This is breast cancer, a breast cancer study. The annual goal is to educate 650 women. That is an aggressive goal, but through breast cancer screening and diagnosis, there has been funding that has been awarded in order to provide these types of screenings and patient navigations to women in our community. Next slide, please. So please note that while I am highlighting some of the research and some of the research awards that are currently at Texas Southern University, this is not a comprehensive list. But I wanted to be able to point out the Dr. Robert Bullard Urban Planning and Environmental Policy project, where the environment, transportation, climate, energy, economic health, and racial justice are all being studied, because health disparities is comprehensive. And you need to have the opportunity to study things from many, many angles and to engage our community members. On the right-hand side, you'll see that this award to Drs. Lowe and Solitaire from HUD was recently awarded, and they're actually having a kickoff on May 10th. So please be on the lookout for that. Next slide, please. Dr. Ajawali has already spoken to you about the $8.6 million grant from the National Institutes of Health. I think this slide is so important because I know how difficult it is to receive a Research Centers for Minority Institutions grant, and know how important that is to build up the infrastructure at an institution. And I just really want to highlight the colleagues that work so diligently and continue to work, because once you receive the awards, you have to execute, but continue to work with the community members to ensure that there is health equity. Next slide, please. It's impossible at an institution or anywhere not to be able to train students. And in order to train students, you have to have funding. Please note that as you see these amounts here, these are annual amounts. This is not the entire grant award, with Dr. Bobby Wilson receiving funding to train undergraduate students from NSF, for the Lewis Stokes Alliances for Minority Participation in the Sciences, and Dr. Holloman, a cancer researcher, and Dr. Mark Harvey, a health physicist. And then we have Dr. Lee, who is actually working with the national, he's a computer scientist, but he's working with the National Science Foundation in order to ensure that more students, more graduate students, go into the professoriate. We have to ensure that the generation who we have has the opportunity for scholarships. Next slides, please. I would like you to advance. Next slide. Next. To this, thank you, this particular slide. It is so very important that community members know that Texas Southern has a heart for each and every person who resides in our state and in the nation and in the world. We are building a health mobile so that there is access to care, because we realize everyone can't come to us or can't get to the healthcare facilities, but we can go to them. So this mobile health coach that you see with a mammogram suite and a primary care suite and telehealth ready will be coming soon, will be being built and will come soon. Next and final slide. In order to conduct research, it is important for us to be able to not do this in a silo, but to actually conduct research in one location and to take that information out. So you can see here, the catalyst is going to be coming to the Old Terry Library. And I just want you to note all of the different types of research that is going to be conducted. So thank you so very much for your time. And I hope that you will continue to be engaged and supportive so that health inequities can be eradicated in our nation and in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, VP Penn Marshalls, for that great presentation, sharing the commitment that TSU has when it comes to addressing health disparities and inequities within our community. We really appreciate you for your presentation. At this time, I would introduce Dr. Olaleye for our presentation. Just give me 1 second while I pull up the slides. Okay, it is our ultimate pleasure to have with us this morning our very own Dr. Omonike Olaleye, who is a professor of pharmacology here with us in Texas Southern University. And she's also the principal investigator for the grant, the CBMHR grant, under which we have the Community Engagement Core. Dr. Omonike Olaleye is a professor of pharmacology and the Senior Associate Vice President for Research and Innovation at TSU. Her formal training in pharmacology and epidemiology were at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and at Harvard University. She has a strong background and expertise in pharmacology and epidemiology research spanning over 20 years. Working on research programs focused on diseases that disproportionately affect underrepresented minorities and the underserved population. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Omonike Olaleye as she speaks about what the community needs to know regarding clinical research. Thank you, Dr. Olaleye, for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the team. Thank you so much, Dr. Ajewale, for inviting myself and Dr. Penn Marshall to present at this great conference. Last year was awesome, but this year already started on a great note. So I'm so excited to be a part of this. This morning, I will be bringing to us what the community needs to know about clinical research. And I just like to show my training and how I began on this journey of looking at health disparities and also infectious diseases, and how this also helps as we build our infrastructure, our capacity, and resources at Texas Southern University. So I'll start out giving you an overview of what clinical research is. I'll give some examples of drug discovery and development here at Texas Southern University. That's the pathway before we get to clinical research. And I will also give examples of some clinical research happening at CSU. And lastly, I would go deeper into the main 4 phases of clinical trials as we go on this journey. So first, clinical research is research that involves people, and it's led to lots of discoveries that we have today. And study volunteers are very key to actually helping us make discoveries, come up with new interventions. And clinical research involves biomedical research, behavioral research. So not just the hardcore sciences, but also behavioral research, where we see how interventions can help in different situations. Also, we have the fact that there's a lot of health disparities, and that was really amplified by COVID-19 and amongst the different racial and ethnic populations. And it's very key that as people conduct clinical research, 2 things are key. Number one, that we actually make sure that all the populations are represented, racial and ethnic populations are represented in the clinical trial. Otherwise, the treatment or interventions, when they get rolled out, may not be effective for everyone in the population, but more importantly, may also have some adverse effects on other populations that are not represented during the clinical research. So it's very key, and I'm just encouraging everyone, when we get a chance to be part of breakthrough, be part of clinical research, whether it's behavioral research or biomedical clinical research. I'm so happy that it turns out that last week, the FDA actually took a very bold step to increase, to modify their guidance on clinical trials, and to charge the industries and all the organizations that are involved in clinical trials to make sure that as they conduct clinical trials, to increase racial and ethnic diversity. And this was by from President Biden's administration, following one of the things he did with the cancer moonshot, the goal of making sure that we're actually addressing inequities. And a lot of these inequities that have arisen from structural racism and social determinants of health, all those differences, they come out to be exposed when we now roll out interventions that are not impactful to the other groups among our population. So this was a very great step for the FDA to do this. I also would like to show an example where one of our very own faculty, Dr. Veronica Ajewale, the director for our CEC core here and the convener of this conference, as well as the director for the CMS grant studying prostate cancer and the breast cancer CPRI grant. She, a few years ago, did a very important study with her students, and she looked at cancer disparities and Black American representation in clinical trials. And she wanted to look at a 10-year span, and she did a retrospective study to find out what is the inclusion of African Americans in clinical trials. And she looked at 3 main cancers that are top 3 disparity-related cancers among the African American population, looking at it from 2009 to 2018. And this slide, this is showing you the percentages of each of the different racial ethnic groups compared to the different cancers. And as you can see, the African American population and the Hispanic population are really underrepresented when it comes to clinical trials that roll out oral chemotherapy. And oral chemotherapy is almost 50% of the drugs that are used for chemotherapy that are approved by the FDA. So we're really missing out if we're not represented in these clinical trials as they roll out these drugs. So it's very key that we participate in it, but it's also very key that the government and the industry partners pay great attention as they design their trials and make sure that their drugs are generalizable. And it's what we call personalized medicine. Now, I just wanted to take you on a journey. Like I said, clinical trial involves behavioral trial, biomedical, it could be biomedical trials for interventions, for new medicines, for new interventions, for procedures, it could be surgical procedures. So it's very broad, but today I wanted to zero in using drug discovery, where we can discover new medicines. And I'm just showing here that it takes a very long journey. It's a very long journey. It takes several years, as you will see in my next couple of slides, but it starts from a group of people coming together to actually plan and identify the specific disease they want to work on, or identify the specific gene they want to target for a specific disease. And as you can see, and I'm saying this now, this is actually from a professor at Michigan. And you can see that where African Americans are not represented even in these pictures, okay? So those are the types of things that we need to change. So not only do we need to participate in the trials, TSU has invested so much to make sure that we develop a great pipeline all the way from K through 12 to undergraduate to postgraduate, to make sure that we're developing a great pipeline and a great workforce that would actually represent the populations that we serve, our community. So we also need to be at the table as we do this. So TSU's leadership has made a lot of investment to make sure that our pipelines are sustainable, and I'll talk to you more about that shortly. So the process starts with a team coming up with a plan, and they start to come up with potential compounds. In this case, it could be small molecules. In some cases, in the case of the vaccine, it could be a vaccine from a large molecule, such as an RNA vaccine, like the COVID vaccine. And then they use a lot of artificial intelligence and a lot of equipment to screen and see which of these molecules are going to be able to do what they wanted to do against this disease. And once we identify a potent compound, we can now go into what we call in vivo studies in animal, early safety study in animals, and efficacy studies. And then from there, we develop further good formulations. We come up with different formulations to make sure that the drug is deliverable to the patient. And then, so this stage is what we call the discovery stage. And then this stage is what we call the preclinical drug development stage. And then now we move to the clinical research phase, where we have the clinical trials, which is broken up into 4 phases. So we have phase 1, where the studies first look at safety of the agent or entity we're studying, and we look at this in healthy people. And again, I don't want to flood this issue, but the point is, even at this phase of phase 1, we have to make sure that all populations are adequately represented. Once we go from phase 1, then we go to phase 2, where we now start looking at the efficacy of the drug in the patient population that we're targeting. And I'll give you more details on each of the phases in my consequent slides. So now you go from phase 2. If you have a successful phase 2 study, then you can move to phase 3, where you're now looking at the safety and efficacy, monitoring of adverse effects in a larger population. And then from that, if a drug is successful at that stage, it now gets rolled out, and the entity, the agency or the industry has to apply to the FDA to actually approve that drug. And once the drug approval process is done, it gets approved, it can be rolled out. Then we have phase 4, where they now start looking at, after it's been rolled out, again, in a larger population, where what we call pharmacovigilance, where we keep monitoring adverse effects for years. And I just wanted to mention that the drug discovery process is it takes a big team. So a very multidisciplinary team, a very diverse team to actually do this work, all the way from the discovery stage to the preclinical drug development stage, to also when we conduct the clinical trials. And again, I just want to mention that it's key for us not just to be represented when it comes to doing the trials, but also we're finding out that it's very important that we're part of the decision-making process, that you have a diverse set of people with diverse expertise, diverse background, diversity in racial and ethnic populations as well, so that by the time you get to the end, you have interventions that are actually going to be safe and effective for a large population. It also takes a lot of agencies to make this happen. You get funding from pharmaceutical companies or federal government agencies such as the NIH. The FDA is very key because they serve as a regulatory agency. And we also have the clinical trial team, and we also have the business team that markets, and also the pharmaceutical team. But also, I just wanted to share that also at TSU, we actually have our drug discovery labs that are doing this type of work. We have the drug discovery lab, we have the preclinical development labs at Texas Southern University. So just to remind you again that it's a very lengthy process. The drug discovery can take close to 6 years or even more sometimes. And the drugs, we screen millions and thousands of compounds in this case, and we come down to hundreds of compounds. And finally, we end up with just single-digit compounds going into clinical trial. Again, we have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and that can also take years. And that's actually clinical research is where a lot of the money in drug development goes to. And then after that, the FDA approval, and then phase 2, the post-marketing stage. And it's very key, again, that we participate from the beginning all the way to the end. And also in the discovery stage, we're now starting to engage by the help of the community engagement core at Texas Southern University. We're having our different investigators that are working on drug discovery and preclinical drug development to actually engage the community, to make sure that we're not just sitting in our labs doing what we think is cool, but Dr. Ajewale's community engagement core and team, they actually work with our health systems to identify the health concerns of the community. And from there, we can investigate what are the interventions that will be available. So all the way from the discovery phase, it's very key for our community to participate. We need your input in the decision-making process. Again, this is just some of the centers here at TSU that do work related to drug discovery, development, and clinical research. This grant already has been mentioned. We're so blessed to have a very diverse team, diversity in talent, diversity from different racial and ethnic groups. And it's just been a blessing to work with this team. And this is one of our centers that has a lot of preclinical drug development projects. This is another center, our Gulf Coast Consortium for Center for Comprehensive PK and PD. And I just want to mention this, that Texas University serves the state of Texas when it comes to helping to take drugs from discovery all the way to preclinical drug development. This is the team, this is our infrastructure at Texas Southern University. We have several labs, and also we have our partners at University of Houston there. These are our students here that you see in the conference room. And also we have the great animal care facility where we do a lot of our preclinical development work. This is Ms. Bess and our big division of research and innovation team that are working behind the scenes on the leadership of Dr. Penn Marshall to make sure that our research goes well. I just cannot leave without telling you that we've had a great progress in being able to get some money to even further expand our services by building the Institute for Biomedical Excellence and Advancing Minority Research here at Texas Southern University, where we get to also do the drug discovery, but also we're able to conduct trials on our side where we have the trust of our community to do that. I'm going to move quickly because of my time. And I just wanted to say that we also have right here at CSU the development of potential clinical drugs for the COVID-19. So we're also not just sitting at the table, but our hands are deep in actually looking for drugs that will potentially help our community. And I just wanted to say, you have to know your right. You have to know your right. That's a very key thing that the community needs to know when it comes to clinical trials. You have to know your right. We have the Institutional Review Board, which is a governing board that actually goes through all the processes and makes sure before anyone conducts clinical trial has to be approved. This constitutes of community members, scientific members, lay members that actually contribute to making sure that the process that the investigator is going through is appropriate and it's going to be safe and effective for our community. We have informed consent. So this is where the healthcare provider informs and educates the patient about what they need to do, what the study is about, and they have the right to be able to make sure that they know what they're getting into as they go into clinical trials, and a lot of documentations that go on that have to be submitted to the FDA. And this is just a more breakdown of details showing the different trials phases. So phase 1, like I said earlier, is to look at safety, the dosage, how does the drug work in the body. Phase 2 looks at how effective the drug is, the efficacy of the drug, and also the safety of the drugs now in the patients, and 33% of drugs move to that phase. And then lastly, phase 3, before approval, 25% of drugs move to that phase. And then phase 4 is where we do most of the post-marketing surveillance. And I just was showing a story here about Vioxx that was rolled out by Merck in 1998. And then later on down the line, when they did phase 4 studies, found a lot of cardiovascular events that actually resulted in deaths of thousands of people. And so we don't want these types of things to happen, is why we need to really ensure that we know our rights, but also we participate in the different phases, from the decision-making process all the way to the clinical research process. And the FDA is rigorously holding the drug companies accountable for that. Again, encouraging everyone to participate. This is just showing that at Texas Southern University, we are building an army. We're building an army of undergraduate students that are going to be well-rounded in the process of clinical research that affects our community. And we're encouraging you to participate with us. We have 7 programs currently, all of our university with different disciplines, building a sustainable pipeline all the way from K-12, undergraduate, postgraduate, to make sure that we are in the decision-making process, but also able to build leaders, our TSU leadership program, to build leaders that are racial and ethnically diverse as we go through clinical research. And this is just some of our partners that we have. And like I said, on the right hand, you see all the projects from our CCPF core led by Dr. Liang and Dr. Jay. And thank you so much for your time to the CEC core. Thank you again for inviting us to myself and Dr. Penn Marshall to open this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laleye, for that incredible presentation, walking us through and walking the community through the steps that is involved in clinical research, and ultimately to be able to prompt community members regarding the questions that they need to ask when it comes to openness and awareness regarding clinical research. Again, I want to say a big thank you to VP Penn Marshall and to Dr. Laleye for the incredible support and leadership that has been shown within Texas Southern University as we continue to work collaboratively together to address health disparities within our community, in TSU, and all across the globe at large. Thank you. At this point, we will transition into a performance, and I will go ahead and share my screen as I introduce the Baylor College of Medicine group. Just give me one. Okay, great. So the Baylor College of Medicine Theater Outreach Program is from the Dan L. Duncan Comprehensive Cancer Center at Baylor College of Medicine, employs multi-pronged strategies to engage with communities in the Houston area. Most of this work is done through the Office of Research and Health Disparities. Their innovative theater outreach program has been in existence for more than 12 years to promote cancer prevention among racial ethnic minorities. More recently, they created theoretical performances to complement cancer prevention performance and address barriers of minority participation in clinical research. The theater outreach program performances are available on a dedicated playlist in the Baylor College of Medicine's YouTube channel. Please feel free to scan the QR code and the link to their YouTube is also going to be posted in the chat. So please sit back, relax as we enjoy this presentation put together by the Baylor College of Medicine titled Win-Win for Everyone. Thank you.
Darryl, you got to hear this. So this morning, when I was walking to my domino game at the center, I saw a funny looking flyer. At first, I thought it was for free stuff. Yeah, you know I'm a sucker for free stuff. But when I read it closer, it was for something called a clinical trial. It's some kind of exercise study that the college is doing. Exactly, because I've been trying to get back into exercising. My daughter Lauren stays on my case lately to take my health more seriously. She keeps telling me that she sees all these unhealthy people as a nurse at the hospital, and she doesn't want me to end up like them. She says not managing some important aspect of your health, like blood sugar, cholesterol, smoking, or being overweight, can lead to some scary stuff. I mean, you can get diabetes, heart disease, or cancer more easily if you don't take care of yourself. So, I've been trying to get back into shape. I was curious if this clinical trial was a good opportunity. I brought it up with Lauren when she called this afternoon. Apparently, there's a lot of these clinical trials that help make better treatments for people with various illnesses or people who just want to improve their health like you and me. She was really excited about it and thinks it might help me get motivated. Now, I know I need to get serious about this. So I thought it might be fun if we both signed up. But that way we can do the program together. Well, that's what I asked Lauren. What would I really be signing myself up for? She explained it. It's pretty simple. During the study, they would pay for doctor visits and special training. She also says it's a good way to get testing done for free. I mean, they'll watch your blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, and it might even help you get healthier too. All we got to do is show up to our appointments and classes. Lauren said the doctor will explain everything we're going to do in the study before we start. And we can ask questions if we have any concerns. And even if we sign up today and end up not liking it, we can leave at any time. Now, I know what your suspicious self is thinking. Oh, these things are always controlled by the government. They just want to get our information. But Lauren told me that the college can only keep information about the trial. They can't share it with anybody. They don't use our real names or personal information. They can only use the information to show them if the trial is helping us get healthier. Now, I was surprised and not shocked that Jimmy Earl always takes part in flu vaccine trials. He said the researchers were nice and they never ever shared his information, and they always kept him informed about all his results. Now, Lauren also told me not many black folks join these trials. Well, she said black folks, a lot of them are scared to participate in clinical trials because they think the researchers are going to use us as guinea pigs. And that's not good. Well, because doctors need to know how things affect African Americans. But they need to know what works for us so they can provide us the proper care. Times have changed. Research today is not like the Tuskegee experiment. There are restrictions in place to protect participants, especially their privacy. They never ever shared Jimmy Earl's information. And Lauren told me they have people in place whose only job is to see that all rules are followed. And on top of all of that, we can have access to programs and medicines that may improve our lives before everyone else even hears about them. So, yeah, it sounds like a win-win for everyone. Well, so what do you say? You on board? Great, great. I'll give them a call and find out how to get signed up. I'll talk to you later, Daryl. That was Quick Reels for Community Health. Please find us on YouTube or visit our website to view other performances and a calendar of virtual and live events.
Well, thank you so much. And now we prepare to move into our second speaker session. beginning with Dr. Rain Rouse. Can we pull the slide back a couple, please? Thank you. All right, so Dr. Rain Rouse is Assistant Professor and Associate Director of Community Engagement, Office of Diversity at Baylor College of Medicine. She serves as a physician on the bone marrow transplant stem cell transplant program at Texas Children's Cancer Center. Dr. Rouse is board certified in pediatrics and pediatric hematology oncology by the American Board of Pediatrics, spending her clinical time seeing leukemia and lymphoma patients. Dr. Rouse is an avid volunteer serving for several years for the events and programs for children with cancer and other life-threatening diseases. Her fluency in Spanish has allowed her to provide care to children all around Texas, as well as those living in small villages in Bolivia. Dr. Rouse, thank you so much for being here today and talking with us about disparities among African American as well as Hispanic populations. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Loud. And I have to say, I'm enjoying this conference so very much, and I'm so excited to be in everyone's presence and presenting on a really important topic, looking at realistic reflections on the impact of race and ethnicity in research. So again, I'm an associate professor of pediatrics and hematology oncology, but I'm also a clinical and translational researcher looking at early phase clinical trials like the ones that Dr. Olalaye discussed in her presentation. But I also lead the Diversity in Clinical Trials Task Force for the Comprehensive Cancer Center at Baylor College of Medicine, and I'm also a director of community outreach for Baylor College of Medicine. So why do we conduct clinical trials? So Dr. Olalaye gave us some background. We need to add knowledge to the treatment, diagnosis, and prevention of diseases. And so while we often focused on clinical trials that are for finding new treatments, we have to remember that there are a number of other ways that we study medicine, and that's also with diagnosis and with prevention. So from a scientific and clinical perspective, proportional representation of all people in clinical trials is really important to ensure that what we learn from the trial applies to everyone. This is regardless of race and ethnicity. And this underscores what we just heard in the science skit. So we all know that representation is key in every aspect of our lives. So why should it not be key in clinical trials? But there's really a disappointing reality, and that reality is that the participation of Black and Latino patients in clinical trials of all types, so whether this is an interventional treatment trial of a new drug or whether this is a behavioral research trial, is actually far less than white counterparts. And the question is why? And we've heard some reasons why this may be the case, and many of us on here may have our own reasons, but the truth of the matter is that people often cite historical events and they discuss why things like the Tuskegee experiment may have impacted the reason that African Americans are not interested in clinical trials, or smallpox for Native Americans and several other historical events for Hispanics. But few understand the specifics behind why it's difficult for some to move beyond these historical events. And so I want to walk you all through an exercise that I've done with my colleagues who are clinical researchers, the majority of them not from underrepresented groups, so maybe less familiar. And I think it's important for all of us to truly have an understanding of the why, so we can have a better understanding of the how do we actually address it and fix it. So why are historical events that happened so long ago still relevant today? So in 1926, so a long time ago, syphilis, which is a venereal disease, was a major health problem. There was a 35% prevalence in people of reproductive age. This is quite high. So the Public Health Services and Tuskegee Institute started a natural history study called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. And many people have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, but I want to break down the actual details. So there were 600 Black men, 399 with syphilis, about 200 without syphilis. They did not sign any informed consent, okay? They were told they were being treated for bad blood, but they did not actually receive treatment for syphilis. But they did receive free medical exams, meals, and actually burial insurance. The study was initially projected to end about 6 months after it started, okay? But in 1934, so almost 10 years later, the first studies showing health effects of untreated syphilis were published. In 1936, 10 years after the study started, early study data was published, and it was criticized because it was unclear whether the participants were actually being treated. In 1940, there were efforts to hinder men from getting treatment that were ordered under a military draft effort. In 1945, so almost 20 years later, we actually had an accepted treatment for syphilis, which is penicillin, a very common and very well-known antibiotic. In 1947, because of the prevalence of syphilis in all communities, the USPHS established rapid treatment centers so people could readily have access to treatment. We've talked a lot about access being a barrier, but the men on the study remained untreated. In 1962, okay, so this is almost 40 years later, 127 Black medical students rotated through the unit where these men with syphilis were being studied. And there were concerns raised shortly after that about the ethics of the study. In 1969, the Centers for Disease Control reaffirmed the need for the study, and the study actually gained continued local medical society support. In 1972, so almost 50 years later, the first news articles condemned the study. An ad hoc advisory panel was appointed to review the study, and they called it ethically unjustified, recommended stopping the study, and the study ultimately was ended 1 month later. Congress actually held hearings, and a class lawsuit was filed 1 year later. And in 1974, 50 years later, a $10 million out-of-court settlement was reached, and the participants received lifetime medical benefits as well as burial services and benefits to the widows and their offspring. In 1995, President Clinton apologized on behalf of the nation for the study. And in 2001, the President's Council on Bioethics was established. So just to put this in perspective, I was born in 1982. My mother was born in 1948. And unlike many people who learn about the Tuskegee experiments when they're in medical school or as an adult, I actually learned about it when I was around 5 because I asked my mother why one of her close friends talked like that and walked like that. And her response was that he had participated in the study. So this really hit home for me because I'm an African-American physician. I'm an African-American physician who runs clinical trials, who does early research, and yet and still throughout my training and throughout my career, it's been very prominent in my mind that there are historical, understandable reasons why people who look like me do not want to participate in clinical research. And so I'm here to tell you that the skepticism is real, it's understandable, but like we've heard this morning, there are numerous safeguards in place to ensure that history does not repeat itself. And that is why I'm here today, because I want to make sure everyone is aware of those. So the Tuskegee syphilis events were directly responsible for many of the government mandated research safeguards that we have available today. There are specific protections for any person participating in a clinical trial, starting with informed consent. Emphasis on the word informed. It's not just about telling you about what's going to happen in a study or in any treatment. It's about ensuring that you have all of the information that you need to make a good decision. Researchers are required to include diverse patient populations. I could have danced all day when I saw that information that was released from the FDA where they're really mandating this, you know, calling people to the table. And remember, we need this because representation is key. And most importantly, clinical trial oversight is real, it is frequent, it is designed for the sole purpose of protecting, informing, and ensuring the safety of the participant. And that's not just the safety of them clinically, that's also protecting all of their information. So I want to talk briefly about a couple of the safeguards that are in place. So an institutional review board, so I've served on the institutional review board at Baylor for about 10 years. And I just want to talk about what it is, how does it work for the patient? It is solely designed to ensure the safety of patients. So it consists of a number of different members. And so there are scientists, there are non-scientists, there are people that are not at all affiliated with the research center, so they have no conflict of interest. There are patient advocates, people who are literally there to advocate for patients. And then there are community members. There are also other doctors and nurses and researchers who are within and outside the field of study. And most importantly, people that review clinical trials are unrelated to and without benefit to the clinical trial itself. There are also data safety monitoring boards. So once you actually begin a clinical trial, and even before, you have to have a data safety and monitoring plan in place. And it is designed, again, to work specifically for the patient. So I've served on data safety and monitoring boards, and these are individuals who play different roles in clinical trial monitoring. They usually are appointed, and they're also called data monitoring committees. And what's most important about this is these are people that are objective, and their sole purpose is to review the data that is available there at the time and to ensure that if there are any safety concerns, any ethical concerns, that a study is halted while this is addressed. So a little bit of trivia. So I love Dr. Olalaye's slide about the winding road of all the various safeguards that we go through from bench to getting things to what we call bedside or the clinic. So on average, how many experts do we think have reviewed a clinical trial for safety and appropriateness before it's even allowed to be presented to you as a patient in the clinic? No suspense, at least 100, usually more. And this is because there are people that are on the IRB, that are on the data safety boards. There are people at the Food and Drug Administration. There are usually institutional groups that review all of these concepts even before they make it to the point of being submitted to outside groups. So this is really important, and it serves as a safeguard. So I want to talk about some specific patient-reported barriers, because remember, we're all about patients in the community, and we don't just want to make assumptions about what we think are barriers as healthcare providers and scientists. We want to talk to the people themselves. And so these are specifically from studies of African-American and Hispanic, Latinx patients. And these are barriers to clinical trial participation. And I think for the most part, these will not be wholly surprising to us. So clinical trial design related, a lot of people are very uncomfortable with the concept of being randomized, right? What does that mean? It means it might be a 50-50 chance that you receive a treatment. They're also uncomfortable with the idea of a placebo, that if you're randomized to the arm of the study that doesn't involve the study drug, that you're taking, for example, a sugar pill, the way we've historically called it. People are concerned about complex or really stringent study requirements that cause you to have to come to the clinic a lot more, do extra things you normally wouldn't do. And then, of course, there's a misconception that clinical trials are not appropriate for serious illnesses. As a cancer doctor, I often have to break down this barrier and misconception, because in a lot of cases, a clinical trial may be the only access that a patient has to a certain drug that could be beneficial. And then just a general discomfort with the research process itself, and we can understand why that is. Like our SCIT participant said, ensuring that you're not going to be a guinea pig and experimented on. Patient related, so a lack of awareness or just limited knowledge about research in general, fear, suspicion, and mistrust, often for good reason. If you are of a lower socioeconomic status, or even if you are quite comfortable, if you have to change your lifestyle to participate in a clinical trial and have extra visits, that can often be a barrier. And of course, language and cultural barriers. logistical, lack of transportation, financial burden, interference with work and family responsibilities. Life doesn't stop because you're diagnosed with an illness and are being presented with a clinical trial. And then the concern about burdensome procedures and out-of-pocket expenses. But one category that I really want to highlight here is there are a number of physician and healthcare related issues that can impact consideration of Black and Hispanic patients for clinical trials. And evidence shows that, Evidence shows that minorities are often delayed or considered for clinical trials at a later stage where they have more advanced disease. And this is often because of physician bias and perceptions that a patient may be less likely to meet stringent eligibility criteria or less likely to be interested because of historical things. But evidence also shows, I'm a scientist, I have to look at the evidence, right? That access, not willingness, is truly where the difficulty lies in recruiting and maintaining underrepresented minority research participants. So we have to look at what can we do about that. So we want to empower you. This CEC core is all about empowerment. And so what are some questions that you should ask about a clinical trial that's offered to you, a family member, a loved one? So if you're coming to me and I say, look, you're eligible for this clinical trial, let me explain to you why I think it would be beneficial, you should be empowered to ask, why do researchers believe that the study drug or whatever they're studying, the intervention in this trial should be tested? You should ask, why do you think it would be effective? You're my healthcare provider. Why do you think that this could be something that could work in me? Has it been tested before? Again, you want to know at what phase of testing is this? Dr. Olalaya went through the different phases of research. How will it be determined what interventions I receive? Is it by chance? Is it randomized? Is it a computer flip of a coin? Or is it based on some characteristic about what I'm being treated for? How do the risks, the side effects, the benefits compare with the standard treatment or my current treatment? A lot of the decision-making is looking at risk benefit also, right? We always look at risk benefit from a healthcare provider and scientific standpoint, but we encourage you to ask about this and do the same so you can understand the thought processes. And will I know whether I'm being treated with the study drug or will my doctor or nurse know? There are studies that are what we call blinded, where sometimes they're double blinded, where neither the doctor or the patient knows, but there's someone else who knows what you're being treated with. And then if you don't receive treatment on the trial, how does that affect your overall treatment? These are really important questions. If you come to see one of my friends and colleagues, Dr. Hoyos or Dr. Robles, and they're presenting a clinical trial, you may ask them, how will this affect my day-to-day life, my family, my responsibilities? These are good questions, right? Life doesn't stop. What do I actually have to do? What tests or procedures are involved? How often do I have to be hospitalized? How long does a study last? Is this a 3-month study? Is this a 6-month study? And then after I complete the actual study, is there long-term follow-up? And then are results available to me? This is an important question. Are the results that you're learning from the research, are they going to impact my clinical care right now? Or are they going to potentially help others in the future? Who will oversee my options while I'm on the trial? And then if I actually benefit, sorry about that. Oh, what happened there? Sorry. If I actually benefit from the trial, can I continue to receive the drug or treatment? And then when do I have to decide? This is an important question because often we want to have a bit more time to talk things over, to think about it, to talk to a trusted family member or advisor or pastor. So a well-designed clinical trial really should have thought about the answers to each and every one of these questions. So when you're asking these, the provider should be able to provide these answers for you or your family member. And if they're unable to, should feel very comfortable saying, you know what, I'm not exactly sure about the answer to that question, but I can definitely talk to someone and provide it for you. So what else can you do to empower yourself, your family member, your loved one? Don't be afraid to ask for additional information or question info that does not make sense. This is not you challenging someone. This is you empowering yourself, getting all the information that you need. Don't be afraid to ask for an interpreter or a different interpreter. I can't tell you the number of times that I'm in clinical situations where a family member or a patient really feels like the dialect that the interpreter that is provided is speaking is not comfortable to them, or like they feel like they would like to have a different interpreter. Healthcare facilities are equipped to provide interpretation in a variety of languages, not just Spanish. And so it's important to ask about these. If you'd like additional loved ones or shared decision makers or religious or community leaders present, say so. And then if you need more time to think, ask your healthcare provider or team, is this possible and is it safe? And in the majority of situations, it is clinically safe for you to take a couple days, to take a week, to take a consent form home, because often you'll think about additional questions that you may want to ask. And then ask about patient and disease advocacy groups that can help you to make these decisions. What are we doing as healthcare workers, as researchers, as community doctors and physicians and scientists? What are we doing to improve your experience? We are increasing the diversity of our research team. All the presentations thus far have really highlighted the fact that we need to have more diversity, and not just of race and ethnicity, but of thought and of experience. We're participating in training and bias. We're making sure that we address our own biases so that we can communicate in a culturally competent way, so that we can address misconceptions up front, so that we can address historical events that may really factor into your decision-making up front. And we are listening to you. Again, this is all about you. It's not about us sitting in a room with our white coats on, deciding what questions are most important or what are most important to address. It's about coming to the community. And then in that vein, we're partnering with community and patient advocacy organizations. The partnership with TSU CBMHR has been amazing for me personally as a Baylor College of Medicine physician, because everything is directed towards the community. Providing relevant educational materials in non-science gibberish in various languages, right? We really need to take out a lot of this science mumbo jumbo that we tend to speak on and really talk in plain old, understandable language, and researching how we can improve. So with that, I will close, and big thank yous to the CBMHR, the CEC, everyone here, Dr. Ajawole, Dr. Olalaye, Dr. Grace Lau, Dr. Ndefo, everyone who's been so helpful, all of my colleagues, because it really does take a village. And I hope that I gave you guys some food for thought and that you're thinking about your questions that you want to ask as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. You gave us great information. I think sometimes part of the problem is just knowing what questions to ask. So thank you for giving us that information. All right, so now we'll move to our next speaker. Dr. Zelma Tuthill is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at the University of Houston. Her research agenda examines the connections between racism, sexism, heterosexism, and health. Her current and previous projects examine health inequities across the intersections of race, ethnicity, nativity, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Specifically, her published work draws on an intersectional framework to examine the unequal distribution of health risks, access to quality healthcare, and access to health promoting resources. So as both a researcher and a former healthcare caseworker in the Houston area, she understands how identifying racism, sexism, and heterosexism can reproduce poor health environments and the need to close those gaps and reduce health disparities. As a Latina immigrant and a sexual minority woman, Dr. Tuthill merges her personal perspective as a member of a marginalized community to produce research that provides applicable and important information to people in communities that need them most. Dr. Tuthill, thank you so much for being here today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my And so there's so much to talk about in talking about health inequities, particularly about LGBTQ health inequities. So I'm going to focus particularly on certain things that I think are most important. And I want to start by just talking about two concepts that I hear a lot over and over, and that's health disparities and health inequities. And so health disparities is just a health difference that we attribute that is related to different types of factors, including economic, environmental, social. And so it's linking the cause to the difference in the health patterns. Whereas a health inequity is looking at the differences, still linking them to things outside of what we can control, but it also adds like judgment that it is an unjust thing, that it is avoidable, that it can be something preventable. And so people like to lean towards a health inequity approach because it not only says these are the differences and this is what causes it, but it says that's wrong. And that is something that we should address and we should change. And I always want to start talking when I talk about health differences among sexual minority populations about something that I think is overlooked time and time again, and that is the diversity within sexual minority populations. They are so diverse across so many different things. First, looking at race and ethnicity, looking at gender identity, looking at age, and looking at sexual identity groups. So for example, lesbian compared to bisexual compared to gay. And this is kind of highlights the different levels of disadvantage. So people who have these different types of disadvantage are going to have different needs. And I want to start off by pointing to this figure, which just shows an increase in those Americans who self-identify as a sexual minority person. And while these percentages seem small, 3.5% starting in 2012 when we started asking people this, this means doesn't necessarily say that every year more LGBT people are being born, which could be the case, but we don't know. What it's just kind of highlighting is that more people are feeling comfortable in identifying as an LGBT person. And we're seeing this within research as well, that more people are willing to be able to participate in clinical trials. But the LGBT racial diversity is very real and it's very stark. About 42% of LGBTQ adults in the United States identify as racial and ethnic minorities. That's almost half of LGBTQ people in the United States saying they are identifying as a person of color or as Latino, Black, or another type of racial ethnic minority group. And there's also a lot of differences in poverty in what the economic profile looks like. So this is just percentages of people living in poverty, right? So the higher the percentage, it's not good. It's not a good thing. And we see here differences between men and women and then different sexual minority groups. And I just want to point out that it's kind of similar, but it's still different, right? So when we have 15% of heterosexual men indicating that they live in poverty compared to 29% of bisexual women. And even between bisexuals, right? 25% of bisexual men relative to 29% of bisexual women. All these differences, all this diversity really contributes to more complexity than just saying one group is disadvantaged in the same way. And so I want to point out to specific patterns. There are so many patterns to talk about, but I'm going to point to 3 or 4. And starting with HIV, because it is something that has garnered a lot of attention. There are still alarmingly high HIV infection rates among transgender women, particularly among Black and African-American transgender women. They comprise 2% of new HIV diagnoses, although they only make up less than 1% of the entire US population. Black or African-American, gay, bisexual, and those men who reported male-to-male sexual contact are also more affected by HIV than any other group in the United States. They comprise 26% of new HIV diagnoses. And among Latinos, while still high, the number of HIV infections among gay and bisexual men has actually been decreasing since 2015, and they comprise 22% of new HIV diagnoses. So even among racial minority groups who are also sexual minorities, we see differences. The health needs of Black or African-American sexual minorities is not, it differs slightly in different ways from those of Latino sexual minority. And you can see here, we're talking about sexual minority men, right? Because we don't see those alarmingly high rates among sexual minority women. We actually see higher rates among racial minorities among heterosexual women. And then just in terms of well-being, more sexual minority adults report poor, fair, self-rated health. And what that means is when you ask people, do you feel good? Do you feel healthy? People who say, I have poor health, are saying that they feel the worst. And so we have higher percentages of LGBTQ identifying people who say that they don't feel good compared to heterosexual people. And in terms of mental well-being, we have a higher percentage of those identifying as LGBTQ, indicating that they have higher rates of some sort of psychological distress relative to those who identify as heterosexual. And then I want to point to something from my own work. And this is a graph that shows a lot of different colors. And I don't want, the point is not to memorize this pattern, but this is just highlighting again, those people who are indicating that they have the worst health. And what I want to point to is these different colors and these different lines of graphs really emphasize the diversity within the disadvantage, right? So if we look among heterosexuals, we see those racial differences. We see that some groups have much higher rates of people saying that they have the worst health. So again, here, higher rates is worse. But then if we look at gay, lesbian, and bisexual, we still see diversity and differences among them. So looking at bisexual, we see by far the highest percentage of people who are indicating that they have the worst health are bisexual Latina women. And if we compare Latina women just across the board, we see different percentages compared to lesbian and bisexual. So it would not even be accurate to say that Latina sexual minority women are similarly disadvantaged, because there's such a difference between a Latina lesbian woman and a Latina bisexual woman. And then here, pointing to Black or African American, similar rates between gay, African or American or Black men compared to heterosexual. So again, that story of disadvantage looking the same across different groups does not really represent what we see when we consider those different identities. In terms of smoking, about 1 in 5 sexual minority adults smoke cigarettes compared to about 1 in 6, and that there are higher rates of smoking among gender minorities. Transgender adults are 2.1 times more likely to smoke. So this just means higher percentage of people who are LGBTQ are smoking, and a higher percentage of people who are transgender are smoking than those who do not identify as transgender. And then importantly, when we look at actually using healthcare services, we see that sexual minority people have less access to healthcare compared to heterosexuals. There are lower rates of insurance coverage in the sexual minority community. And although there has been changes due to the legal recognition of same-sex marriages, that still results in higher rates of uninsured sexual minority people compared to heterosexuals, and an increased number of LGBTQ plus people saying that they report delaying care due to medical cost, which just means that they postpone seeking care because they cannot afford it. Here, I have a statistics that says 16% of bisexuals reported delaying medical care compared to 7% of heterosexuals. So almost double the percentage of people. And so I showed you the diversity within these populations. I showed you some of these patterns and the diversity within those patterns. So what is causing these patterns? And there's lots of research out there that is trying to understand that. And what we see among different groups, among heterosexuals, among racial ethnic minority groups, we see specifically among LGBTQ plus groups as well. So we see that economic vulnerability. And so I showed you that graph that shows the high percentage of poverty rates among sexual minority people. If you don't have money to go to the doctor, if you don't have money to take care of yourself in ways by being able to afford those things that can provide you the ability to have better care, then you're not going to be able to maintain good health for the longevity of your life. Reduced access to healthcare. I just pointed to some of that information, what the data is telling us. LGBTQ plus people are less likely to utilize healthcare services. One, because they can't afford it. And another is the lack of cultural competency. And what that means is LGBTQ plus people don't feel, to put it simply, that their doctor understands them. They feel very uncomfortable talking about their partners, talking about their sexual identity. Many times they're not asked about their sexual identity. And while it may not be relevant in every medical encounter, for example, going to the dentist, you may not have to tell someone that you are a bisexual woman. But if someone's asking you and making small talk and trying to ask you about your partner, and you're partnered with a man, but they're asking you about your wife, it's that sort of uncomfortable message that tells you, that you're different, that they are not aware that who you are is not normal. It's something that has to be pointed out. And when I interview people in my study, they tell me that actually discourages them from continuing to seek medical care because it's so uncomfortable. And then the social stigma, which just means in society, although I showed you that graph where more and more people seem to be feeling more comfortable in identifying as LGBTQ, there's still stigma about what it means to be an LGBTQ person. And we can see that now today in society in terms of these laws and these policies trying to limit the way that we talk about sexual minority people, trying to avoid having laws that prohibit discrimination based on sexual identity. And so all of this put together is kind of contributing to these inequities, to these health differences. And so there are a lot of researchers like me trying to figure out what our role is and what our place is in trying to address this, right? Because as a health equity scholar, someone who's trying to address these health inequities, we want to say this is wrong. This isn't just a health difference. This is a wrong thing, but also that it can be prevented if we address these particular factors that I'm pointing in this slide. So what do we do when we're trying to, include LGBTQ members into our research? And some of my colleagues have talked about some of those challenges in research participation among racial and ethnic minority populations. And if you could call it bread and butter, is looking at the experiences of LGBTQ plus people, but specifically LGBTQ plus people who are also racial and ethnic minorities. So when you're a racial and ethnic minority who is also a sexual minority, you not only have racism, you not only have, but you also have homophobia. And so these are things that you kind of have to deal with and that really impact your decision to participate in a research or clinical trial. And so there are some challenges. And the main challenge I hear from people time and time again is recruiting. I cannot get LGBTQ people, or if I do, they're mostly white. And so there are a couple things that I can point to and kind of from what I've learned and in talking to my colleagues, and that's be clear what you mean by LGBTQ populations. And this may seem very common sense. Just ask people, are you gay or lesbian or bisexual? But there's a big difference in using sexual orientation and using sexual identity. Sexual identity is how someone chooses to self-identify. So they themselves are saying they are a bisexual or a gay man. Whereas a sexual orientation kind of includes sexual behavior, includes same-sex partnership, includes attraction. What I'm finding in my research and what others are finding is that particularly racial and ethnic minority people are less inclined to embrace the LGBTQ label. So we're more private about our sexual identity. We'll talk about certain things, about attraction, about behavior, but maybe I'm not as comfortable saying I'm a bisexual person, which leads to my second point, that you have to come out to be able to participate in a research trial. And I think many times that's minimized. That coming out is a very vulnerable experience. And so when you're recruiting people and you are, point blank asking them, are you a LGBTQ person? Some people are very comfortable and out in very different scenarios, but other people are not. And the more I study and understand the experiences of other sexual minority people who are also racial and ethnic minority people, the more I realize that it is a sort of like a cultural or a group pattern similarity, that we're more reserved, and the way that we are hesitant to kind of embrace these LGBTQ communities is because of the stigma, but also because of the racism experience within those communities and the racism that we have to navigate. So having to deal with racism and homophobia makes us so that we're less inclined to want to come out so openly. And these populations are harder to recruit. Just any population that is small in size is harder to recruit. So what can we do? Well, we can recognize the past trauma. So as my colleagues have been saying, there is past trauma among different particular groups. That is true of the LGBTQ community. Not that long ago, you were considered to have a mental illness if you identified as a sexual minority. Currently, gender minority identity is considered a disorder. Transgender people, gender identity dysmorphia. So what can we do? Well, building trust is an ongoing task. It's not just something that you can do in step one of your recruitment to say, trust us because we have IRB approval. What I've learned is people want to actively see you in every step of the project, showing that you are a trustworthy person. So I tell people, you know, when you share, what you share with me is not only gonna go to a report, but that report is gonna go online. That report's gonna be at a conference. That report's gonna be told to my students, and the recognition of their privacy, right? Of knowing that this outness, that I'm going to be talking about their experiences, that they are not just a number, that they are someone who has navigating the stigma and this vulnerability, really shows that I'm interested and invested in building their trust. And then finally, include members of the LGBT community, not just saying that I showed this to a bisexual person, but actually showing and integrating a person from this community in every step. So in the research question, in the recruiting, I think most times people just focus on relying on LGBT people, communities in the recruiting phase, but people want more. People want it in the analysis. People want integration in the interpretation, in the sharing of this information. That really shows, as I talked about previously, this ongoing trust. And it's hard work and it takes a lot. And even as a bisexual woman trying to do this work, I don't necessarily am always received with open arms, but in making small steps, we can really try to make an imprint, especially here in the Houston community, that we care, that we genuinely care. And so that's it for me. Thank you so much again for having me, and I will turn it back over.
Dr. Tudhill, thank you so much for educating us about the diversity within the sexual minority populations. Very valuable information. Okay, so we are really in for a treat because Dr. Rouse and Dr. Tudhill will continue this open discussion about health disparities and clinical trial representation. And before we do, I'd like to introduce two additional scholars to the panel who will also join us in the discussion. Dr. Joanna Robles is an assistant professor of pediatrics and pediatric hematologist oncologist at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. Her research focuses on exploring the clinical impact of language barriers in pediatric cancer and stem cell transplantation. She is an active member of the Children's Oncology Group, including the Diversity and Health Disparities Committee and the Language Barriers Work Group. She's also a member of the American Society of Hematology Minority Recruitment Initiative. Dr. Robles, welcome. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Valentina Hoyos Velez. Dr. Velez is a physician scientist who has focused her career over the past 15 years in the preclinical and clinical development of adoptive cellular therapies for oncological diseases. She completed her internal medicine residency through Baylor's Medical Resident Investigator track and her medical oncology fellowship training at Johns Hopkins. She currently holds a position as assistant professor at Baylor College of Medicine Center for Cell and Gene Therapy and the Dan Duncan Comprehensive Cancer Center, where she treats patients with breast cancer. She also serves on the Dan L. Duncan's Comprehensive Cancer Center's Diversity in Clinical Task Force, and she's been instrumental in ensuring underrepresented patients have access to cancer care and clinical trials. So Dr. Velez, thank you so much for being here. All right, so Dr. Rouse is going to serve as our moderator for this open discussion, and I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Rouse.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm so excited about this panel because all of the talks this morning have really been giving me life. And as much as I'm a person in this space who, always thinks about these healthcare disparities and how we can improve, I really appreciate all the important insights from everyone here. And I'm excited about how much even I have learned. So we'll jump right into it. First, I just want to review, and thank you so much, our esteemed panelists. I just want to start the conversation by reviewing the different types of research. So we talked a lot about interventional treatment or clinical research, but I love that Dr. Oyavide Tudhill talked about some behavioral research and other types of research, and it's really important. And Dr. Robles does research in cancer care, but also looking at language disparities. And Dr. Hoyos is a very talented researcher who does cell and gene therapy research like me, but for breast cancer, but also really looks at innovative ways to reach patients, whether it's through her cartoon artistry or whether it's through videos. And so I think we have a really exciting group of people who can answer a variety of questions that you guys have. So I just want to first say that we really have focused on the importance of engaging underrepresented populations, specifically people who are sexual minorities, people who are African-American, Hispanic, Latinx, in clinical research. But also, I want to point out that there are genomic databases, for example, that talk about different mutations that allow people to engage in research. And if we're not represented there, then we don't necessarily have the most up-to-date information coming full force to us. So I'll kick it off with a question to Dr. Hoyos. So Dr. Hoyos, thank you so much for coming. So based on your area of expertise, what are some barriers specifically to representation in clinical trials to the Hispanic population that you have encountered? You as a physician who is often presenting options for later phase clinical trials, like phase 3 trials, but also are presenting options about translational work that you literally have worked on at the bench in the laboratory, and you may not be able to say this has been studied in 100 people. There may only have been 2 or 3 people. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's been really educational. It's been amazing to be here and hear all the talks from everybody. Very inspirational. So yeah, I think there's a lot of barriers to the Hispanic community to participating in clinical trials, starting from just access to them. Thankfully, I work at Harris Health, which has all of the clinical trials open that we have at the McNair side, which is the private side, and also are open at Harris Health. So that's an amazing opportunity for them to participate. But the majority of them, when you start talking to them about clinical trials, they haven't really heard at all the term or what it means. So I think, first of all, education. So having access not just to actual trials, but access to information like we're providing today about what a clinical trial is. And a lot of the times, there's a language as well as a cultural barrier between the investigators and the patients. So I think it's been helpful that I'm Latin American and I speak Spanish. A lot of these patients don't speak English. And so I think that has helped to get access to them, to these trials. The other thing that I do want to point out is that there's this, as Dr. Rouse mentioned, I do also preclinical research. So we actually study tissues, tumors from patients. And of course, we want to represent that as well from African Americans, from Hispanics, for all kind of minorities. And so we have to get access to their tissue, and that requires a biopsy, and that can be painful to get a biopsy. So a lot of the times convincing them that this might be good for the future, for the community in the future, maybe not necessarily for them. Clinical trials might give you the benefit of yourself access to the drug, but in this case, it's really no benefit for the person itself. It's benefit for the future of the research that we might get from that patient's tissue, which is crucial as well. So it's another point of trying to represent more minorities in this preclinical research side of things as well.
It's such an important comment, Dr. Hoyos, and I know that probably all of us on this panel can empathize with it. There's this polarization. Like, we're excited to be able to speak Spanish and to communicate with patients, but we also look around and wish that there were so many others who could, and I just think about the disservice that often patients probably feel when they do have a language barrier, even a cultural barrier. And so I know that you work a lot to try to empower your colleagues who may not speak Spanish, but may be using an interpreter to understand some of those barriers and give them tips and tricks about things to really think about when they're going into a scenario. And I love that you touched on the fact that it's important for us to be involved in the same tissue research, to look for different markers, to look for mutations, to be included in these genetic registries and databases. So important. All right, I think we will move it. That's a perfect transition right over to Dr. Robles. So Dr. Robles, I'm really excited that you're here because I've gotten to learn about some of your really important research looking at language barriers, which is something that we all, regardless of what type of medicine or science you are in, if you are patient facing, you will certainly encounter this. And we really need to have better ways to address this. And it starts with understanding the problem, right? So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that, but I also want to specifically ask you, what are some ways that Hispanic community members who are predominantly Spanish speaking can advocate in a clinical research environment for having a more responsive environment that's more conducive to their needs?
Thank you for that great question. I'm so excited to be here and I've learned so much. So I would say that Spanish speaking or other non-English speaking community members can advocate for a clinical research environment that is responsive to their native language when they appreciate and advocate for their rights to interpreter services in their primary language and to written materials in their native language as well. And I think this is particularly important when you're being approached regarding a clinical trial and when the details about the benefits, the study protocols, the risks can be very complex. And I say this because there have been many times that I've observed that there are patients and families who have a primary language other than English, who may for some reason appear to be ashamed that their primary language is not English. They feel that they don't want to burden the clinical team. And I have learned this through my clinical practice, but also through my research as well. And I believe that this lack of recognition of their rights as a patient and this hesitancy to receive the services that they are entitled to can lead to some misunderstanding and communication gaps. And as a bilingual pediatric oncologist, I have had so many Spanish-speaking families ask me a ton of questions when they have a visit with me, if I'm not their primary oncologist, that they deferred asking earlier because they didn't want to take more time from the previous non-Spanish doctors who were using interpreters. So Spanish-speaking community members can spread awareness of the rights of patients to have access to interpreters in their native language, be proud of their native language, not be ashamed to ask for the services that they are entitled to. And even further, they and really any patient community should feel empowered to ask questions and to clarify points that they do not fully understand so that they can feel informed and confident in the clinical research environment. And I believe that by advocating for these rights, we then educate and reinforce to other clinicians that they need to use interpreters, quality professional interpreter services for each and every encounter, not just for the big conversations, as I hear a lot of times, but for each and every conversation to appropriately interpret medical encounters in their entirety. And it is also important for community members to provide feedback when they experience shortcomings, when their needs are not met, so that clinicians and hospital systems are aware of these shortcomings and know when to improve them.
If I could clap, I would. Actually, I can, so I will. Thank you so much for that. It's so informative. Just yesterday, I had an encounter with a patient and a family just rounding in the hospital where this patient was several months into their cancer treatment. But because I spoke Spanish, they had a ton of questions that I think had not adequately been previously addressed. And the sign out that I got was that they're very comfortable in English. And what I found is that they actually did need interpreter services. And I love that you highlight that, because it often is a situation where patients or families will say, no, it's okay, as if it's a burden on the provider. And I think one of the things we can do to really address those barriers is the patient. We love to empower them and we want them to advocate for themselves. But as we find this information, we need to also advocate for them and advocate within our healthcare system so we can work cooperatively together. Thank you so much, Dr. Robles. So valuable. Okay, Dr. Oyarbide Tudhill, I'm so excited to talk to you. I was glued to the Zoom screen watching your presentation because it was so very valuable and really an area of research and discussion that we need to bring to the forefront of all types of research. So I wanted to ask you, considering how diverse the LGBTQ population is, how might those designing and or establishing clinical research like myself or Dr. Hoyos or Dr. Robles, how can we better demonstrate affirming members to increase representation? I think that we often, especially now, it's at the forefront of people's mindset to make sure we address race and ethnicity barriers, but it often is not at the forefront to address these others. Especially, I love the part where you talked about often when you're approaching people about these research opportunities, you have to remain cognizant that you may be in some ways outing them. And that is truly a barrier. So please tell us what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I two things come to mind when I think of this, and that is, I think this idea that as researchers, our best teachers about the experiences are the people that we're trying to, learn or to investigate. And so many times I'm in a conference room, and to be very real, it is white gay men talking about the experiences of health patterns of the LGBTQ community. And they'll say things like, the most marginalizing experience as a gay man. And I think like in my head, I'm like, no, as a white gay man, because it's so different. And so when I start all my interviews, I actually say, you have just asking, what does sexual identity mean to you? Because if you just ask someone, and doing this, I actually have found, this is how I discovered that, for example, a lot of Latina women don't say they're bisexual or lesbian, but they're partnered with a woman. And so it is just that sort of openness that we have so many assumptions about sexual identity based on certain types of people doing this type of work. And so to go into a research or clinical trial starting from like zero about like, well, you just teach me, and I will ask I ask them everything from what is community, what is healthcare, like everything that I can ask, because there are so many assumptions about this community. And then I think, and this kind of ties in, but I wanted to make sure to really emphasize the investing in researchers that look like people who we are really trying to like learn from, because I'm the only sexual minority person in my department who's doing health research. And when I go to these communities, they will tell me how frustrating it is when they participate in these research and no one is a sexual minority on these groups. And they're like, they're nice. I know they're nice. And they're from this university and they do this and I know they care, but you couldn't find one gay person. And so in a city that's minority majority, when we know that almost half of LGBTQ, like people are, they smell fake, and they smell when they say, you just didn't try. It's not like you couldn't find someone, it's you didn't try. And so I'm honest with them and I say, hey, I'm the only one there. Like, I'm trying to do this. And that openness of like, it's hard for a girl out here trying to do this research. And they respond to that and they understand. And they're like, they're more invested because they see that transparency, that I'm not trying to teach them something. I'm trying to understand. And so I think that it's that representativeness, that diversity. And then finally, LGBTQ plus people, especially brown and Black people, are not only at the Montrose Center. Like, we are everywhere. We are trying to be doctors. We are at universities. And so I have people tell me all the time, like, they only go to the Montrose Center, or they only go to these LGBTQ groups. And they're like, I'm like a business person. I'm gay, but I want to like start a business. And so expanding our recruitment and our idea of what it means to be an LGBTQ person, I think will also allow us to have more of that diversity.
So wonderful. Such good information. And if you're watching the faces of Dr. Hoyos and Robles and I, we are just emphatically responding. Dr. Hoyos.
I want to say, I understand what you're saying about representing more. And actually, I am lesbian. So but it's not that clear, when you see my patients. I'm not going to tell every patient, by the way, I'm a lesbian, instead, obviously I'm Latino. So how can we improve that so that patients know when they're enrolling in clinical trials that there are some researchers in the groups that are identifying it as LGBTQ?
Yeah, I've actually asked this. And so in my interviews with people, they were like, well, you ask me, you ask me point blank, are you a gay, lesbian person? And so I actually offer that. And it's hard for me because I'm not like a very out, person. And so it was a decision for me. And it's hard because it's like, oh, like, do we have to do that? But what I have found when I do that type of, I have kind of molded this kind of motivation for myself to say, if I'm open, I get openness in return and I get comfort. And to be very real, I have to go see like a therapist about what that means for me. And it speaks to a larger problem, right? The fact that there are not like many like me caused me to have to make these decisions about being more open than I would willingly be comfortable. So that speaks to a whole other issue that I wish but I see what I hear and I see what you're saying. And that I think it's part of the problem, right? Like the fact that is an issue too. But what I have found from my experiences is that vulnerability and transparency, I get it in return, and that's been positive. But I know that that's not for everyone, and that there should be more conversations to know what has worked and what hasn't.
Such good commentary. And it's interesting because Dr. Hoyos and I do very similar research where we literally are using genetic modification of cells and giving them back to patients. And our group is very sciencey, right? But while we're trying to integrate these health disparities and while we're trying to look at ensuring that we're reaching all populations, there often isn't I guess, comfortable or obvious place, right, Dr. Hoyos, to introduce yourself to a patient that may be LGBTQ as a lesbian. And so I think these conversations are so valuable because we as providers are learning from experts like Dr. Oyavide Tuthill about how we can really start having these conversations, right? And I think the overwhelming theme throughout is the transparency that our patients respond to. And it's obviously not going to happen overnight, but we're getting closer. Thank you so much, everyone. You guys were so wonderful. I just want to wrap up real quickly with a little bit of a statistic for us to think about. So, actually the percentage of ethnic minorities, racial and ethnic minorities who are participating in phase 1 trials. Remember, these are the early safety trials in most cases. Sometimes they're using healthy folks, but in our fields of cancer, they're obviously using patients who may not have other options. So the percentage is actually higher than representation in later stage phase 3 trials, which are often ones that are sponsored by pharmaceutical companies, right? And by big organizations. And so I just want to ask really quickly to Dr. Robles, Dr. Hoyos, and even Dr. Oyavide Tuthill, what you think are factors that can lead to this kind of drop off and reduction in participation from the phase 1 out to phase 3? And are you excited about the recent FDA guidance to make sure that we ensure representation of racial and ethnic minorities? Dr. Robles, we'll start with you.
Well, definitely excited about that initiative. And certainly I think that part of the issue for limited diversity in those phase 3 trials in relation to language can sometimes be the access of some of the materials and the appropriate consent materials in the person's native language. Many IRBs have different requirements. Some require that all of the materials are translated, but some just require that a very short form. And so I think if there's not access to those extensive consent materials that really explain the intricacies of a phase 3 trial, there may be some confusion that leads to some hesitancy for non-English speakers to participate.
Such a good point. Okay, Dr. Hoyos. Anything to add?
I was exactly going to say that. And I guess when it comes to phase 3, just how can we ensure that it gets to the communities where there is, higher percentage of minorities?
Yes.
Instead of, small communities that maybe are mostly white.
Right. Moving outside of the big academic institution and ensuring that we're reaching community physicians and practices and even geographically restricted regions, right? Okay, Dr. Oyarvide Tuthill, take us home.
Yeah, and history has taught us that if you make people do it, they will do it. So making someone do it will ensure that they do it, unfortunately. But I think I'm very excited about, the government stepping in and trying to at least force the hand sometimes to acknowledge that. And I think I'm, again, learned so much from everyone here and very excited that there are so many people thinking about this and having these conversations.
Wonderful. Excellent way to bring us home. I couldn't have said it better myself. That concludes our panel. Thank our panelists. You guys are amazing.
Dr. Rouse, thank you so much. Dr. Tuthill, Hoyos, and Robles for such an open, a wonderful, and engaging panel discussion. Okay, so true to the spirit of why we're here, the spirit of inclusivity, we want to say thank you again to the Baylor College of Medicine for allowing us to utilize another clinical trial skit. This time it is in Spanish. And so we just remind you that you can access the Baylor College of Medicine YouTube channel using the QR code here in the right-hand corner. But please enjoy the video titled Todos Ganamos.
José, tienes que oír esto, amigo. Esta mañana, cuando iba al centro comunitario a mi juego de dominó, vi un volante que llamó mi atención. Al comienzo pensé que algo regalarían, ya sabes, me encantan las cosas gratis. Pero leyendo con cuidado, era un anuncio sobre un estudio clínico sobre ejercicios que está haciendo la universidad. Lucía interesante. Exacto, estoy tratando de volver a hacer ejercicios. Mi hija Laura últimamente ha estado detrás de mí para que tome mi salud más seriamente. Ella me cuenta sobre tanta gente enferma que ve ahí en el hospital donde ella trabaja como enfermera, que no quiere que yo termine como ellos. Dice que esa gente no cuida algunos aspectos importantes de su salud, como el azúcar en la sangre, colesterol, fumar o estar obeso, que todo eso puede ocasionarles daños terribles, como contraer la diabetes, enfermedades del corazón o cáncer más fácilmente si es que uno no se cuida. Tú sabes que estoy tratando de estar en forma. Así que me dio curiosidad saber si ese estudio clínico era una buena oportunidad para continuar por el camino correcto. Le comenté eso a Laura esta tarde cuando me llamó. Aparentemente hay muchos estudios clínicos que ayudan a la gente a tener mejores tratamientos para una serie de enfermedades y desean mejorar su salud, así como tú y como yo. Ella estaba muy emocionada y dijo que esto podría ayudarme a mantenerme motivado. Ya sé que necesito tomar en serio esto, así que pensé que sería bueno si los dos nos registramos. Como ve, compadre, de esa manera podemos hacer el programa de ejercicios juntos. Exactamente eso le pregunté a Laura. ¿Realmente para qué yo me registraría? Ella me explicó que es muy simple. Mientras dure el estudio, ellos pagarán la consulta de los doctores y el entrenamiento especial. Ella dice que es una buena forma de hacerse los exámenes gratis. Ellos se miden la presión arterial, el colesterol, el azúcar en la sangre, y eso nos puede ayudar a tener una vida más saludable. Lo único que tenemos que hacer es presentarnos a las citas y a las clases. Incluso, si te registras pero no te gusta, podemos salirnos en cualquier momento. Ahora ya sé qué pensamientos te preocupan. Estas cosas siempre son manejadas por el gobierno y ellos lo que quieren es tener nuestra información. Pero Laura dice que la universidad solo mantiene la información del estudio y que ellos no pueden ni deben compartir esa información con nadie. Además, ellos no usan nuestros nombres ni nuestra información personal. Ellos solamente pueden usar la información que puede ayudarles a ver si el programa está ayudándonos a estar más saludables. Oye, también me dijo que no hay mucha gente como nosotros que le interese participar en estos estudios. Y eso no está bien, porque eso significa que los doctores no saben lo suficiente sobre algunas cosas que afectan a la gente hispana como nosotros. Los doctores necesitan saber lo que funciona para nosotros y así darnos mejor atención médica. Entonces es importante que nosotros participemos. Sí, parece que todos ganamos. Entonces, ¿qué dice, compadre? ¿Te animas? Excelente. Les llamaré para ver cómo nos inscribimos. Bueno, José, tengo que dejarte ahora porque parece que llegó mi hija Laura y me trae algo de comer. Sí, yo te llamo después. Sí, de acuerdo. Hasta luego. Acaba de ver Quick Reels para la salud de la comunidad. Por favor, encuéntrenos en YouTube o visite nuestro sitio web para ver otras presentaciones y el calendario de los segmentos en vivo.
All right, I hope you enjoyed our clinical trial skit. So now to round off our second speaker session is Dr. Stephen Shodeke. He is a professor of bioethics in the College of Arts and Sciences at Tuskegee University. He is a resident bioethicist at the Center for Biomedical Research and served as associate and interim director of the National Center for Bioethics and Research in Healthcare, and as special government expert on the Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Advisory Committee for Human Research Protections. Dr. Shodeke chairs the IRB and responds to research ethics consultations using literature and art as narrative imaginations for discussion of ethical questions. He researches community bioethics, health and human rights, health disparities, genomics, ethics, neuroethics, and plights of vulnerable populations. Dr. Shodeke, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Dr. Shodeke, we can. Thank you.
Okay, all right, wonderful. I want to thank you for the introduction, and I also want to thank the Center for Biomedical and Minority Health Research at Texas Southern University and the Community Engagement Core team headed by Dr. Veronica Jiwale and my help there, Ms. Evelyn Casas, who has agreed to help me let you hear some voices other than my own during this presentation. This presentation is to ensure that we come full circle. Full circle in the sense that it helps us to look back in order to look forward. Stated differently, it answers in part the question, how did we get here? Now I know times are changing and things are changing, so we should promote positive change too as well. Let me see, let's see if I can advance my slide here. So I want to acknowledge these wonderful people here that support my work at Tuskegee University. They give me life and they keep me going in this enterprise. Our president, Dr. Charlotte Morris, our provost, Dr. S.K. Hargrove, and my dean, Dr. Shana Prakash, my community people, Ms. Bernice Fraser, Dr. Lucinia Dawn, and my director of the Center for Biomedical Research at Tuskegee, Dr. Clayton Yates, and Ms. Chiquita Lee, our program coordinator. I want to offer a disclaimer here that my work is supported in part by these grants from NIH, NCI, RCMI, and Tuskegee University. I also want to state that the opinion offered in this presentation are solely mine. It does not necessarily represent the official views of Tuskegee University, the National Institute of Health, NCI, or NIMHD. Looking back, in order to look forward, we find that there are significant moments of medical infamy in research and experimentation with humans. And I list here a number of those events, some of which we will cover a little bit more on. Some of you may be aware of Dr. J. Mario Sims, an Alabama surgeon who experimented on Black slave women in order to perfect vesicular vaginal fistula, which some of us take for granted now. The United States government human radiation experiment, we'll touch on that. Of course, you've heard about USPHS, a study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, otherwise known as the Tuskegee syphilis study. And Dr. Rouse did an excellent job on that. So many to fast forward when we get there. You may be aware of the Guatemala inoculation study that involved the same, one of those physicians that were involved in the syphilis study at Tuskegee. Of course, the Nuremberg Nazi doctors trial, you may be aware of that. You may also be aware in the United States of the Willowbrook School study of hepatitis in Staten Island, New York. You may be aware about the New York Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital, in which live cancer cells were injected into folks out there just to see whether they can produce antibodies against those cancer cells, even though the only thing is that they were chronically ill and they took them for granted. Ethical violations in clinical research as years went on was cited by Dr. Henry Beecher, 22 of them. For example, only 3 citing the informed consent that Dr. Rouse referred to. The case of Henrietta Lacks is very known now, and they have a Supai versus Regents of the Arizona State University. We'll touch on that a little bit as well. So here's where we start. I want to start with this fellow here, Mr. Vatus Wellborn Hardiman, who in 1927 was one of those experimented on with the human radiation experiment. Diagnosed with ringworm in 1928. Parents were unsuspected. 10 children were involved in these. Children were severely irradiated during the medical experiment that was conducted by the local hospital there. All children experienced horrific side effects, including necrosis and disfigurement. This gentleman here had to wear his wig for 80 years. The hospital, by the way, received a verdict of not liable for that damage. But Mr. Hardiman bore his injustice and distress with remarkable dignity. And he donated $8 million to his church for the education in this kind of research and other studies. So I thought that I might let us hear a bit from Mr. Hardiman. So Ms. Casas, if you are there, can you please help us play the tape?
Of course.
Do I need to stop sharing or?
That's our talk. There's a black man that founded Lao Station.
This is amazing about Lao Station. The black community played such an integral part in that whole process of freeing slavery.
Oh, yeah. They called this little community Freedom Village. We never thought much of segregation. That was normal when we came up, because that's all we knew.
I knew that something was wrong on this particular day. All of a sudden, he began to sob. He was sobbing uncontrollably. And he said to me as a child, 5 years old, I was experimented on. I was experimented on with radiation.
They had a little round beanie they put on our heads, and then two girls stood behind a lead screen, and they pushed a button, and it seemed like I saw some flashes. And she told the other nurse, "Oh my God, I've given him too much."
Make a joyful noise unto the Lord.
I think any sort of description of what has occurred and what Virtus lives with on a daily basis is nothing short of incredible.
Are you angry?
No. Because if you're angry, that means your heart's not right.
Hallelujah, 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 singing.
It was God.
Thank you very much. Let's see, what do I need to get back? I just need to continue sharing screen.
Yes, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. All right, so this is where we were. And let's see if it will advance. Some ethical issues are raised here in terms of transparency, use of research terms that are not familiar to participants. Some of the earlier speakers have alluded to that, particularly when it comes to surrogate decision-making. Question of betrayal of participant trust, trustworthiness of research investigators, physical harm that has been inflicted, dignitary harm as well, emotional harm, reluctance to trust medical establishment, reluctance to be engaged or be recruited for medical research. I am not going to belabor the point regarding this paradigm case number 2. All I'm going to do, because Dr. Rouse actually did an excellent job trying to walk through that, and we learned a lot from that. What I'm going to do is just to let you hear a little bit of the voices from Tuskegee. Ms. Casas?
More about how the disease affects the body, the Public Health Service initiated a program in Macon County, Alabama, a rural farming community with a high incidence of syphilis. 600 men were recruited for the study. 400 had syphilis. 200 used as a control did not. Nearly all were poor farmers or sharecroppers.
The first time we went, then others, 3 or 4 of us went together, and they just some kind of milk, something like milk to swallow, and I don't know what that been so long, I don't even know what that was for.
When the study began, there was no cure for syphilis. Standard treatment consisted of mercury rubs and arsenic injections. Initially, the men in the study received treatments, but with the stock market crash, funds were no longer available and treatments were terminated. However, researchers continued to collect data on the men in the expectation that funding for treatment would become available within 6 months. Ultimately, the 6 months of non-treatment would continue for 40 years, and throughout that period,
Okay, thank you very much. Let me go back to my screen now, my slides rather, so we can continue from there. All right, so you've had it straight from the mouth of, and the ethical issues that are raised mirror are similar to the ones that I indicated earlier. But particularly here with respect for participant autonomy and dignity. So you can begin to accumulate reasons why we got where we are now. All right, I'm only going to say a few words about this. There is a popular book that you probably are familiar with by Rebecca Skloot that documents this experience, but this happened at Johns Hopkins Hospital, Baltimore, Maryland. Miss Henrietta Lacks diagnosed with cervical cancer, but then, you know, the cells were cultured, lots of money is being made. There's nowhere actually in the world where her cell, HeLa cell, they call it, has not been used in research. If we had time, I would have asked you the question, what is particularly troubling to you? And by the same token, the ethical issues that are raised, particularly in the use of tissues, continue to be of serious concern these days, particularly the introduction of broad consent into federal regulations. And so that's continually being debated. Questions of private and security and confidentiality of data becomes something that are raised in these matters. Let's look at the fourth paradigm case involves they have a super tribe community where we have Arizona State University researcher going out there in order to study diabetes, which was prevalent there in that tribe. But they ended up studying things other than diabetes. Okay, Ms. Casas, help us hear a little bit of the video.
They took my mom and my dad.
And I was 19 years old when they took my blood.
Blood has deep spiritual meaning to the Havasupai.
Many people obtained degrees, and what did we get? Nothing.
Carletta Toulouse was one of the very few members of her tribe to attend college. In 2003, while a student attending a dissertation reading, she was shocked to discover that her tribal blood samples had been the basis for studies beyond diabetes research.
All sorts of studies that were harmful to our reputation.
Researchers had looked at their blood for possible genetic markers for schizophrenia and had studied patterns of inbreeding. An anthropological study traced the tribe's ancestral migration from Asia, which contradicted their religious beliefs that they'd originated in the canyon.
A strange person whom I never saw before, taking a part of our bodies, and he finds out that we came from elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Casa. Those video, the full video, are actually publicly available. You can Google them, and they will be. All right, so let me. And again, the ethical issues here, as you can tell, as I alluded to, the use of all these bulk specimens in the right way becomes quite problematic. But things have changed. We have learned. So all of these regulations, this is a slide of documents and regulation, Nuremberg Code, Declaration of Helsinki, the National Research Act, Belmont Report, the 45 CFR 46 Code of Federal Regulation, that is otherwise known as the Common Rule. The FDA has been mentioned today, privacy protection, certificate of confidentiality, all of these things, and the use of IRBs and ERCs, even international research has jumped in way back in the 1980s, international committee guidelines being issued and reviewed and revised ever since then. So things are changing. What's take-home lessons, you can say, for us now? What makes clinical trials as research ethical? You might say we need to consider value, enhancement of knowledge from the research. Maybe that's valuable, right? But we also need to consider scientific validity, which means we need to care about the methodology, which must be rigorous, fair selection of subjects and distribution of benefits. And burden has been alluded to. We don't want people all lumped, people lumped in clinical trial phase 1. We want many to be in phase 3 as well. And I'm so glad that FDA is taking care of that. Reasonable compensation need to be considered as incentive. Of course, we cannot do without IRB to provide ethical oversight. Informed consent is extremely important, and that also has been explained. Respect for persons enrolled in research. We respect people when we can speak their language, when we can show them that we really do care, and when we can show them that we value their privacy, and so that they are well informed. I put this there because I wanted us to know that trying to do all of this, and we have seen an excellent example at Texas Southern University, where everyone binds together to try as much as possible, doing their own part to move these common concerns and goals forward. Each one of us is a piece, like a piece of jigsaw puzzle when it comes to identifying and resolving the bioethical issues that are in clinical research and clinical trials for the benefit of all of us. We're all dependent on one another for our health and wellness. I say, can you hear me now? If you can, that's a good thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shodake, for that presentation, covering some of those videos and the things that had happened in the past and how what has happened in the past is impacting, what we have in our current. But the great thing is all the discussions we've had today is all tied together so that we can reposition ourselves to make a decision that would help us make better decisions as we go into the future. Thank you, Dr. Shodake, for that well-rounded presentation about ethics in clinical trials. We appreciate you and thank you for joining us today. To the amazing audience and all community members that are logging in on Facebook, YouTube, all social media handles and live with us on Zoom today, we thank you for staying engaged with us. Please continue to send in your questions. These questions are valuable. We will do the best we can to answer the questions as we go through the course of today's conference. If we are not able to, we will reach out back to you to make sure that we're able to address the questions that you have. Towards that, as we proceed in the conference, we want you to also complete a survey because this survey helps us to plan and prepare for our upcoming events, the conferences and the seminars that we'll be having in the future. And as I said earlier, we are active and live on all social media platforms. Please post, tweet, hashtag CBMHR, hashtag CREC 2020. Feel free to send us a text, TSUCEC, to 855-264-9031. And at this point, we will switch gears as we advance into the clinical panel, the clinical trial panel discussion. It is my pleasure to bring up Dr. Franklin Casper. Dr. Casper is an accomplished researcher and practitioner. His extensive research experience focuses on developing and implementing ongoing infant mortality and maternal health-related comparative performance tasks, including setting national performance measures, objectives, and goals. In his work, he reports, presents, and disseminates performance information that supports the improvement of federally funded programs. Dr. Casper is also a practitioner, serving as the director at Baker Ripley, the largest community development nonprofit in Texas. At Baker Ripley, Dr. Casper leads a team of software developers and business data analysts as they find ways to strengthen how technology increases agency impact and streamlines operational efficiencies. In addition to this background for Dr. Casper, is also the research consultant in the Institutional Review Board. We've had a lot of our presenters mentioned IRB. So Texas Southern University, as part of our commitment as an institution to ethics in research, we have an Institutional Review Board, and Dr. Casper is one of the research consultants in TSU's IRB. Please help me, join me in welcoming Dr. Casper. Thank you, Dr. Casper. We are glad to have you today.
Thank you, Dr. Ajewole, for the introduction. It is an absolute pleasure to be moderating the panel discussion today. Our panelists will be discussing their experiences participating in clinical trials. At this time, I will go ahead with the introductions. First, we have Dr. Janie Bennett, who is a 26-year breast cancer survivor and has participated in 3 different clinical trials, 2 of which were with MD Anderson. Currently, she works to assist women staring a diagnosis of breast cancer in the face, find hope, healing, and make meaningful life changes. To accomplish this, she established Reconstruction of a Survivor, a nonprofit breast cancer organization charged with providing a pathway for women to move beyond a diagnosis of breast cancer for a better life after breast cancer. Next, we have Dr. Dominique Guin, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Health, Kinesiology, and Sports Studies at Texas Southern University. She is an advocate for educating the community on the safeguards enacted to protect the rights of patients involved in human research studies. In 2016, she was diagnosed with Philadelphia chromosome positive acute lymphoblastic leukemia, an uncommon type of blood and bone marrow cancer. We also have Ms. Charlene Upshaw, who is a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, and has resided in the greater Houston area since being displaced by Hurricane Katrina in 2005. She is a graduate of Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas. Her passion really became personal when she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2019. Quickly after receiving her diagnosis, she immediately knew that she would participate in any available clinical trial. Ms. Upshaw is now 3 years into a 5-year treatment plan, and she is cancer-free. And finally, we have Ms. Charlene Holmes, who was diagnosed with stage 3A triple-negative breast cancer in January 2014 at the age of 45, after she noticed a tightening in her left breast. Now out of treatment, Ms. Holmes participates in research studies to help others facing the same diagnosis and to give back to the institution that she feels saved her life. She has participated in 13 breast cancer research studies in and outside of MD Anderson. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Casper.
Pleasure. Pleasure to finally talk to everyone that has participated in trials. You know, throughout the day, we've been talking about the wraparound, support and services that, that allow you as participants to feel safe to participate in trials. So as we have heard throughout the day, clinical trials are the lifeblood of medicine, yet they are struggling for numbers. Without effective recruitment and participation, the cost of producing the next generation novel drugs will rise. So this question is for all our panelists, right? What clinical trial did you participate in and why? I'll start with Dr. Bennett.
Thank you. This has been an awesome, phenomenal presentations that I've heard. Just great. Everyone's done a fabulous job. So I participated in a clinical trial back in 1996 when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. At that time, I was not participating. I was at the University of Houston and understood some things about research in mathematics, but not in terms of breast cancer. So I was given an option to use heparin during my breast reconstruction to prevent blood clotting. And I actually did not get the placebo. I got the real thing, which really helped save my life. So I just, the breast surgeon, not the breast surgeon, the physical, excuse me, the reconstructive surgeon said, we don't have many African-Americans participating. Would you like to do this? And I said, sure, I'll be more than happy to. And I did. And as a result, like I said, it really saved my life. Since then, I participated in another clinical trial, both of these at MD Anderson. And this one was regarding which is a better determiner of breast cancer in women with dense breasts. Of course, this is back in 2000 before they began to use the 3D mammography as an assessment tool. So I participated in that study, and whether the mammogram or combination of that and the ultrasound was the best determiner for indicating breast cancer. And I really, really enjoyed that. The PI for that is actually one of my board members, Dr. Gary Whitman at MD Anderson, is a radiologist. And he came and explained everything in simple layman's terms, not in medical terms. And then I realized that I've got to do this, to help increase the numbers of African-American women participating in clinical trials. Since then, on our website, we do have clinicaltrials.gov, and we talk about this in our support groups as well, in my 9 locations that we have. But I also have seen more of a need as I review proposals, research proposals, serve on a research panel for breast cancer research at the Department of Defense. So it's really increased my need and importance to see I've got to fight for this for not just me, but for the women who are coming behind me.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the same question to Dr. Green.
Okay. Well, the clinical trial that I participated in looked at incorporating a new medicine, and that new medicine or new drug, it's called ponatinib, into chemotherapy regimens. In 2016, I was diagnosed with Philadelphia positive, PH positive, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's a more aggressive type of leukemia. It responds poorly to chemotherapy and then has a high risk of relapse. So when chemotherapy is used alone to treat pH positive leukemia, there's like a 10% survival rate, and then 90% die within a year. So it was ponatinib was a drug that I was introduced to. I did it because it was my best course of treatment. It was the other option was stem cell, which had its own, there were other issues there. So again, for me, it was the best course of treatment. You know, the treatment that I received in 2016 is very different now. Due to the success of ponatinib, the survival rate is now 95%, and those diagnosed today don't even take chemotherapy.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Ms. Holmes, Ms. Upshaw, do you want to add to that?
First of all, am I getting an echo? Are you guys getting an echo?
I think you're fine now. I can hear you well. Oh, the echo comes. You may want to mute one of your devices. Okay. That's probably why.
There you go. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Just let me say real quickly, I had two phones up for technical difficulties. So I had the phone and the computer going, trying to get it all figured out. But I participated in a proton beam irradiation therapy clinical trial. And at the age of 69, my father died from leukemia that he had come out of remission from. At the age of 57, my uncle died. My grandfather at the age of 71, and 2 years ago, my baby brother at the age of 41 from a very rare type of intestinal cancer. So cancer has been very prevalent in my family on the male side, and we weren't sure about females because some of my great aunts, and I'm sure some of you can relate, that people didn't talk about things openly 30, 40 years ago. When I was a little girl, I just remember hearing conversations about my aunt having female problems. And so I never knew if that was some kind of cancer or not. So before I could participate in my clinical trial, I had to do full genetic testing, the kind of genetic testing that takes like 8 weeks to get results back on, because depending on what they would have found genetically, it would depend on what my treatment would look like. Thankfully, there wasn't anything there. So I was able to do the proton beam irradiation, which is a little different from the standard of care radiation, because with this, right now I'm a group of 200 women in the United States because they're trying it out on 200 women total. I think I was number 157 to be enrolled into the trial. And so it targets the specific area where your cancer was found, as opposed to the whole breast, trying to hopefully minimize good tissue being affected. So I was very adamant when I found out I had cancer. They didn't ask me. I walked in the door like, if there's any kind of clinical trial, I want to participate, because I work in this field as well as now I'm a patient. I understand the value of minorities, women of color, people of color participating in these trials, so that they can better find ways to treat us, because everybody's different. Ethnicity groups are different. So it was very important to me. So I walked in the door saying, I don't care if it's a clinical trial showing me how to tie my shoes correctly. It doesn't matter. I just want to participate in one. And I'm glad that there was one for me to participate in.
Thank you. And
my very first clinical trial was my lifestyle list, and it taught breast cancer survivors how to live after breast cancer. So exercise was important, how to eat and how to shop for the right foods. And the PI was Dr. Lorenzo Cohen. And anyone who knows me knows that I am going to share whatever it is my journey is for cancer. My diagnosis, I was diagnosed with the BRCA2 genetic mutating gene. And so I happened to see Dr. Cohen after my 5-year trial. The trial followed you for 5 years. And I saw him in the DMV and I told him that he can't just let his participants go like that. Like I was having a mental issue with leaving them because they had helped me so much in my new way of living. And so in his book that he wrote, he put our conversation in there because he never really thought about how impacted the people that we work with on the clinical trials, and when they leave, how we feel about that. And so, you know, as me, I told him that he needed to change that, like put it to 10 years. I mean, he didn't change it, but he wrote it in the book to show how impactful the trial was. It really helped. It really changed my life. It made me look at things differently because pre-cancer, you know, I was just living my life and everything else and stuff. So then the question is, how do you live after cancer, after a double mastectomy, after the surgeries? You know, how are you supposed to eat so that this won't happen again? What are the best foods to purchase? And so Dr. Cohen's study, My Lifestyle List, was a great tool for me to start. It started immediately after radiation. So I didn't have time to think about anything. They put me right into the study, which I am so appreciative. And then I went from that number 1 to 13 others, because the reason why my oncologist told me that there was no research for Black women with triple negative stage 3 breast cancer. And so although he had to use what he had, I said, I'm going to tell everybody. Everybody should participate in research. Black, Hispanic, whoever, they need to participate for our daughters and our grandchildren and our aunts. They need to participate. And I tell the men too that you can get breast cancer too. So you need to participate in research. And so that's what started me on my research journey.
Thank you for the diverse reason for joining the trials. I just want to note that although all our panelists have participated in oncology trials, there are other trials that are not oncology related, right? In the US alone, you know, I went to, clinicaltrial.gov, and I found out that there are 131,000 registered clinical trials currently taking place in 50 states, right? So you can reach out to the community engagement call to help you identify the trial that you qualify for. So my next question to Dr. Bennett is, what did you have to do in a clinical trial, right, that you participated in? I know you did several.
Sorry, Dr. Bennett, sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, I forgot.
Thank you.
In 1996, when I was first diagnosed with ductal carcinoma in situ, there in the research grants, there was very little funding for the patient to get transportation to MD Anderson's parking. Any parking in the medical center is ridiculously expensive. So there was no funds for that. So I just, bit the bullet and did it because I knew it was important. But that was important to me at that time, back in 96, after being first diagnosed with breast cancer. Down the line, back in 2000, when I participated in the second and third clinical trials, these were all non-oncological trials. The second one and third one together were, they did have funding by then, so that they were getting funds to pay for parking at MD Anderson, the medical center, and no transportation funds, but at least that helped with the parking, since I live right down the street from there. But to me, it's important. And I tell all of our breast cancer patients in our support groups, when I get a chance to talk to our support group leaders, I tell them, we've got several who are metastatic, and I always mention to our leaders, please, please, please indicate to them and ask them to be sure to see if there are any clinical trials. They may not know who to ask, but start with the social worker who can do the legwork for them. So I think it's really critical, but I didn't face any barriers except the first one, which was financial regarding parking at MD Anderson. And the rest, I'm okay.
Thank you. And what about you, Ms. Upshaw? Did you have to do the same, did you have to, or what did you have to do in the clinical trials that you participated in?
The one thing that had me concerned with the clinical trial that I participated in that I had to do, the radiation treatment for twice a day. And they had to be 6 to 8 hours apart. So I could go in the morning and then like have a 6:30 or 7 o'clock session and then come back in the afternoon. And so I wasn't driving at the time because my surgery and everything was my right side, and I still wasn't driving because this was like only a couple of weeks after my surgery. So the challenge for me was that in between time, because that's in the medical center, and I live out in LaPorte, which is about 25, 27 miles. So it was a challenge for me to coordinate family and friends and people that could, get me there in the morning and somebody get me there in the afternoon. So that was a challenge, but even knowing that, I still wasn't discouraged. And I said, even if I had to camp out at MD Anderson, because I also work at MD Anderson, but of course I was on leave at the time. I had told my manager, look, if I gotta come camp out in my office for 6 hours a day until it's time for my afternoon treatment, then that's what I'm gonna do, because I was just determined that I was going to participate in that trial since that was the only one they had available for me at the time. So, and this, as far as the incentive, last week I went to Easter brunch with about 8 or 9 of my female family members, and I looked around that table, and statistically, 1 in 8 women get breast cancer. And I looked around that table, and I'm like, maybe I'm the one out of 8 or 9 that's here. Maybe there won't be another one. But if there is another one, I want to have done something that will make a difference or help them. So my incentive is just the next generation, the next group of women, because there's going to be a next one.
And thank you for your insight. Just like we've heard throughout the day, participation in trials continue to be an issue. I happen to have read a research paper that indicated that 80% of clinical trials don't meet their participant enrollment deadlines, which is really a bit alarming. So my next question to Ms. Holmes is, did you have any hesitation about participating in the clinical trial?
No, not at all. When my oncologist told me, I was already in. I think I was diagnosed in January. I had already started chemotherapy in February, and they had already added me to a list. I came from, so I had been working at MD Anderson for 12 years prior to my diagnosis. And I came from the Department of Behavioral Science, which is all about research. I have a close friend who is a researcher. So I already knew that trying to get participants was already hard. And so for him to tell me that there were nothing for them to help me get rid of cancer for Black women, I was already in. And after that, I was just on the list. The doctors that I work with were like, well, can you participate in my research? And I was like, well, what do you have so that, see if I qualify. I have been at U of H in Tai Chi for research. There are so many researchers, and the ones that I participate in isn't always oncology, but it is, I did Tai Chi for my clinical trial that I did. I had a nutritionist, I had a trainer, I had everything that you could possibly, they gave me an iPad, they bought me sneakers, whatever it is that could help me and stuff in my clinical trial. So no, not hesitation. And I don't hesitate to tell someone else to participate in research.
Dr. Casper, let me make one other additional comment too.
By all means.
One of the things that I've noticed with clinical trials as the persons who are the PIs and are their assistants is how do you communicate to African Americans about the importance of the clinical trial? And I believe that that presents a barrier. The language and the explanations have to be clear enough so that everyone in the room understands exactly what the purpose of the trial is, well, how it's going to benefit the patient, as well as the person coming behind that person who's being treated or participating in the trial. But I believe training of the PIs and their assistants is really, really critical. And it's getting better, but it can be even better than what it is right now.
So I'm going to turn and ask Dr. Green as well, if at all she experienced any reluctance participating in clinical trials. Right.
Initially, I did not have any hesitation about participating in the cancer clinical trial that I participated in. I was in really bad shape. I was one that had signs and symptoms for months, but felt, I was too busy with this or that to actually go to the doctor and see about myself. So by the time that I got there, I was in bad shape. I didn't have other options. So no, not at all. I was also, my daughter had participated in a clinical trial. I was knowledgeable of the safeguards. But something that I would like people to know is that you can stop participation in a clinical trial at any time. Now, I had no reservations about entering, but 2 years into my care and treatment, I wasn't making the clinical response that was expected. And their recommendation, or my care team's recommendation, was for me to go back on hyper-CVAD chemo. Now, the hyper-CVAD chemo was a week in the hospital every month for a 5 or 7 day regimen. It was tough for me. And at the time, I was happy with my quality of life, as well as how well I was doing with the oral chemo. Now, I didn't, again, my numbers molecularly, they weren't as low as they wanted them to be, but I was good. And I chose at that time to go off the study, stay with the FDA approved ponatinib, the drug regimen. Now, I didn't see, I didn't see remission in the time that they expected. My remission came 4 years after treatment. I found out Tuesday, 4/19/22, so earlier this week, that I have no disease. So again, I didn't have any issues going in, but 2 years in, I chose to go off the clinical trial, and it worked for me.
Thank you. Dr. Ralph, in a presentation, earlier on today, mentioned that patients are either unaware or unsure about participating in clinical trials, right? That clinical trial is even an option. And I also know that, earlier on during our conversation, Dr. Bennett mentioned, issues with parking at the medical center. So just want to be able to ask Dr. Bennett if at all there are any other challenges or barriers that you've experienced during your clinical trial participation.
I didn't experience any others. My sister also was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she actually was working at MD Anderson after she retired from the phone company. Her barrier was trying to integrate going to radiation treatment as well as trying to work, because she had to leave her office, go to radiation, come back to the office to work. So many times, those who are looking for participants, particularly from the African-American community, they may not be able to take off from work unless they're compensated. And I have not seen any of the grant proposals I reviewed for DOD to say, they'll be compensated for their time off from work. So it's really important as we look down the road, what's critical to those, particularly those who are uninsured and or who don't have enough, let's put it this way, who are marginalized and really can't afford to miss work. So I think down the line, as we think about the future and as people prepare grants for the future for clinical trials, then I think it's important to remember those factors. Number one, childcare. Number two, compensation for being off from work. And number three, transportation. I know the American Red Cross used to do transportation to treatment, but again, because of COVID, they're not doing that right now. So I think there are many factors, particularly in African and Latino communities that we need to make the researchers aware of that they may not be thinking of. As I help others write grants at MD Anderson in particular, those are some of the things that I try to remind them to do.
And thank you for really touching on the incentives, right? To be able to ensure that, you know what, people actually do participate in those trials. So Ms. Upshaw, did you get any incentive participating in clinical trial?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Did you receive any incentive, or did you get any incentive for participating in your trial, your clinical trial?
No, I did not. I did not get any incentive. And like I said before, my incentive was what I was doing for my future generation. But no, there was no incentive for participation. And actually, I did, like I said, I asked for a clinical trial, and just to comment on something Dr. Bennett said, or to add to it, when I went, they didn't know I was an MD Anderson employee. I didn't tell them because I wanted to see how I was going to be, handled or treated without them knowing I was MD Anderson employee. So when I asked about the clinical trials, it was like a little, I guess, shocking, almost like, what do you know about clinical trials, or like the kind of, this is interesting. This Black woman is, automatically asking about clinical trials. So that was pretty interesting. But to answer your question, no, there was no incentive.
And just like you mentioned, people don't just join because of the incentives, right? I read that 33% of surveyed clinical trial participants indicated that they joined because they wanted to help further medical research. And 29% indicated that they joined to help improve the lives of others. So there is an altruistic, and there are people that are out there that are joining just because they want to be able to further research, right? So Ms. Holmes, would you recommend clinical trial participation, and why, right?
Yes, I would recommend to everyone, not just my community, but to everyone, but specifically my community. I am an ambassador at MD Anderson, where we would go out into the community. And it saddens me to say that when they come up to the table, everybody wants trinkets that have MD Anderson on it, but they don't want to talk about cancer. They shy away. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to discuss it. I was handing out suntan lotion and they were like, we don't need suntan lotion. And I was like, well, you do. And if you participate in this trial, and they're like, no, they don't want to talk about it. I am also a My Cancer Connection. So other breast cancer women who have been diagnosed and they want to speak to someone who has their diagnosis and who is African-American, they usually call me. And the first thing I say to them is participate in a clinical research, like participate in the research. Do you need some names? Do you need some doctors? Do you need some PIs? I have them, like participate in research. So I try, my daughter, my son, I tell them to participate in research because they had to see their mom go through it. And so this is an opportunity for them to share with their peers, because they don't really listen to us children. So they usually listen to their own friends. So I just try to get them to participate in research as well. But yes, I would not have a hesitation at all to have others participate. And the reason why is that, as you can see, like I remember I've spoken to some women who had breast cancer like 30 years ago. And they say to me, they did not have that when I got diagnosed, or they did not do that when I got diagnosed. And they said that research has come such a long way. The day I was diagnosed, the doctor came to me and she says, you're going to be okay because breast cancer is so heavily researched. You will be okay. And I'm thinking to her, like, what? Like, this is not a big thing to you because this is a big thing to me. And she said, it has so much research, you will be okay.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Dr. Gwynn, you are so passionate and you're an advocate for all those that are trying to participate in studies. So one of the questions I'm going to ask you, and our final question is, do you have any advice recommendations for anyone who is considering participating in the clinical trial?
I do. My advice definitely would be to do your homework, do your research, but ask questions. Dr. Royce earlier mentioned questions that you should ask. I feel like you need to ask, what are my treatment choices? And then ask the risk and benefits of each. Ask if there's a hospital, a cancer treatment center that specializes in whatever the condition is that you have. Which option is proven best to work for my diagnosis? How long do I have to decide? What will happen if I do nothing? And then don't be afraid to ask, your physician care team, what is your experience and what is the experience of those that are on your team? Ask how many patients like me, how many African-American women 50 years of age have you treated? How many of your patients had complications? My advice to you, to anyone, you are part of your care team. Advocate for yourself. Your voice matters. And as Ms. Holmes said, when we participate in research, I feel like we're paying it forward. As she said, you heard women that had breast cancer 30 years ago talk about their experience. We benefit from their sacrifices. And I know today, a young lady that is diagnosed with pH positive ALL benefits from, my experience and doesn't have to take chemo today. So ask your questions and participate.
Thank you. And I want to thank the audience for joining us today. And I would also want to really thank the panelists for coming and sharing their experiences today, right? And before we leave, there's just a reminder, May 20th, by the way, is Clinical Trial Day. So let's try to be able to, to celebrate that by bringing awareness to those within our circle, right? And even beyond, right? So the more we bring awareness to our communities, to our friends, right? The more people will be aware of what's happening and then actively participate, right, in something that is very critical. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to the panelists, to Dr. Ajewole, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
I want to say thank you to Dr. Casper as well as the entire panel for taking the time to share with us your personal experiences. It was so valuable. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much listening to you all has really impacted me, considering the things that have, going in all of our lives with family as well as ourselves. So next, we'd like to move on to our next performance. Dr. Jordan Simpson. Dr. Simpson is an award-winning performance poet, musician, activist, and TED presenter. Dr. Simpson appeared in the Huffington Post, the Houston Chronicle, and on National Public Radio, while hosting workshops at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts on climate change, poverty, and economic justice and social reform. Dr. Simpson is a proud 2021 graduate of Texas Southern University College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. He serves as the incoming worldwide and U.S. Oncology Medical Communications Field Medical Postdoc Fellow at Bristol-Myers Squibb in conjunction with Rutgers University. Dr. Simpson's work inspires the belief that our honest reflection and experiences contribute greatly to the advancement of our society. Dr. Simpson, thank you for being here today and giving us this spoken word.
Well, thank you all for so much for having me. I'm so honored to be a part of this programming and its efforts to mobilize our resources for the people we serve. So to everyone that has had a hand in making this programming possible, thank you so much for establishing this foundation. As a clinical trial participant at 16 years old, I was newly diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease. And now I'm benefiting from the new therapies as a result of other trials around the country. It is not lost on me the feelings, thoughts, and emotions that overcome patients while being presented with the opportunity of being included in a clinical trial. The obstacles we as patients face daily can drive a wedge between leaning into the hope that lies on the other side of this opportunity. So I just want everyone to know I hear you, I see you because I am you. All right. So as conversations today circled around themes of access and other barriers to innovative health interventions and trial inclusion, the poem that I have to present today is Purpose to Pay Homage to the Patients. More so of a message bellowing like we see you in all that you face day in and day out, and we are committed as healthcare professionals helping you along the way the best way we know how. The story goes, so the patient history goes, so the health goes. Minority makes history making do with what they have, even though minority doesn't have much. Minority needs urgent care, but no urgent care centers in sight, only clay-burned streets and old Spanish trails trotted with fast food restaurants like minorities' health decline is a mystery. Minority is backed into a corner store thirsty and buys a soda cheaper than water. Minority takes 2 buses and walks 3 miles for a routine checkup. Minority's copay holds their health for ransom. So basically, minority is not sure. Minority is never sure. Minorities uninsured, stuck at the fork by the donut hole at the pharmacy, so chooses the fork instead of the insulin pen. Minority knows of food pyramids, knows the one that renders them at the bottom of the food chain. Minority knows of risk, knows that being a minority means they're always at risk, but now sees lists of risks that metastasize like tumors undiagnosed. Minorities never been tested, but minorities always been tested. Minorities always been failed. Easy to be negative when minority is always positive for something. They say it's the genes we have, but minorities make history making do with what they have, even though minorities don't have much. So minority keeps the hand-me-downs, the predispositions. Even if this position is near fatal, minority has enough trials, but cannot spare yet another puppeteer string of hope for a clinical one, even if it helps. Faith be the Ponzi to the game science plays. Minorities bear the brunt of whiplash. The proverbial dice rolled and weighted. Minorities know the ground is not level, knows the tightrope of a better tomorrow is a suspension between having the courage to believe in it and not having enough to be desperate for change. So the health goes, so the patient history goes, so the story goes, unless we take the next step together. Thank you all so much.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Simpson, for such incredible presentation in the form of this spoken word. And you know, all the things that he's put together in this spoken word is definitely a summary or a synopsis of everything that all our speakers have touched on today, right? Looking at how we started off with VP Penn Marshall on TSU's commitment to, you know, addressing health disparities, Dr. Lale talking about the phases of clinical trials, Dr. Rouse, Dr. Tuthill, Dr. Robles, Dr. Oyos, you know, and even coming through to the clinical trial participants that we just listened to in the panel session, you know, each of them sharing their individualized lived experience. I mean, this is such an incredible information. And I am very grateful that even within our capacity here in TSU, we are able to, you know, put this conference together such that we are able to impact the perspective of people, to be able to inform the thought process of community members when it comes to clinical research, and ultimately for us to be able to address health disparities at large. A big thank you to everyone that has been a part of today's presentation. I think, you know, with everything that we've said, with everything that we have had spoken, you know, throughout the course of this program, the question that lingers in my mind right now is what's next, right? We've been inspired. We've been, you know, clinical trial participants have shared their own experience. Clinical trial researchers, they've shared their own experience. So for each of us as community individuals, my question in my mind, which I hope is also in your mind, is what's next? What's going to be the next step? You know, what do we need to do from this point for us to be able to see the needed diversity in clinical research and for us to see that positive trend when it comes to addressing health disparities? And I would say, you know, again, re-emphasizing what the speakers that have gone ahead of me have mentioned, is that it really, truly takes each and every one of us. And when I say it takes all of us, it's not just each of us as an individual, it also takes the healthcare system, right? The institutions that, that we need to go to get these medications from. It also takes the government as well as policy decision making. And, Dr. Laleye mentioned about the press release that came out last week from the FDA under President Biden's administration, saying that there's going to be more accountability, there's going to be more conscious step to be taken to ensure that there is diversity in clinical research. So this is truly a reflection that indeed it takes each and every one of us to address health disparities and to contribute whatever we can in ensuring diversity in clinical research. And with that being said, my admonition, at this point will be for each of us to make a decision to be the change. We do not want to continue in anger of the trends of what has happened in the past, which is obviously justifiable. But if we want to see a turn, if we want to see a difference in what the future holds, we also need to contribute our own portion of saying, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to be the change. I'm going to lead a change. And I'm going to advocate. When one of the speakers I heard was talking about language barriers, right? When we go into the healthcare institutions, we need to advocate for ourselves. We need to advocate for our children. We need to advocate for the upcoming generation so that the impact of what has happened in the past does not continue to hurt us, does not continue to have a negative impact as we go into the future. And ultimately, for each and every one of us to be that hero who is willing to commit to participating in clinical research, who is more open in having the conversation, is to engage in an open dialogue with physicians, with friends, with families, with people that are within each of our circles of influence. And I believe that if each of us, take ownership, if each of us make that conscious effort, both from the healthcare standpoint, from an individual standpoint, from a policy decision-making standpoint, we can be rest assured that we will see a change for the better. We will see that things are going to transform over time, such that the gap that has been created because of history, because of what has happened in the past, we're going to see that gap continue to close, and that we do not remain in a disadvantaged situation, even as we continue to move forward. So I want to thank everyone that has spoken today. I want to thank every of our speakers, and importantly, to every community member out there that is listening to us today on all our social media platforms, on live, on Zoom. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that we will all come together individually as a body to make decisions that would move us forward. And as we continue in today's programming, I'm going to share 2 videos that would help us to address this question of what's next. The first video is about research match, and then the second video is a clinician's perspective regarding addressing diversity in clinical trials.
More than ever, researchers are advocating for the inclusion of historically excluded racial and ethnic populations to participate in research. Communities and individuals are also looking for treatments to curb the diseases that have robbed them of their loved ones. There is a platform that brings these 2 communities together. That is the research community and potential research volunteers. Hello, my name is Leslie Boone. I'm a community engagement specialist, and I'm here to introduce you to Research Match. Research Match is an online platform built to connect research volunteers with a health study or a clinical trial that's right for them. Let's take a look, listen to Yolanda's story to find out how she got matched.
Meet Yolanda. Yolanda works full-time, takes care of her family, and is always looking for ways to better her community. Recently, Her coworker encouraged Yolanda to join Research Match. Research Match connects you with research studies at major hospitals and universities. Thousands of volunteers of all races, ethnicities, ages, and identities get involved in research through Research Match and help make discoveries possible. Joining Research Match is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Visit researchmatch.org online. Create your confidential volunteer profile. Watch for emails about research studies. If you want to learn more about a study, just tell Research Match to share your information with the researcher. The choice to participate in the study is always yours. Remember, the most important part in finding health solutions for your community is you. Join Yolanda and become a Research Match volunteer today.
So thank you for listening into that. The link to Research Match has been posted on the chat box as well as on all our social media platforms. Please feel free to create a profile in Research Match if you would like to have an opportunity to contribute into the present and also into the future when it comes to addressing health disparities and promoting diversity in clinical research. At this point, I would like to introduce Dr. Chris Amos. Dr. Amos currently serves as the director of the Institute of Clinical and Translational Research, which facilitates development of new translational research projects and studies. His research is primarily focused on the development and application of methods to understand the etiology of complex diseases. He has led the US component of OncoAre Consortium, which has studied over 500,000 individuals to identify genetic factors for common cancers. He has also worked on novel methods of characterizing gene-environment interaction and for Bayesian analysis, including main effect and interaction effect jointly in the analysis. During the COVID-19 pandemic, he and his team led several population-based initiatives to understand the impact of COVID-19 has had in the diverse communities of Houston. And here is a recording by Dr. Chris Amos, who is going to share with us briefly on clinicians' perspective to clinical research engagement.
Clinicians, usually trials are money-losing opportunities. They end up having to spend more time with the participants than just a regular routine visit would require, and often they are not getting paid for some of the time. So that can make them less friendly, perhaps, than would be beneficial. And so I think on the clinician side, paying attention to the communication style is very important. The participants are also spending time, and we need to be very aware of the burden that is placed on both the participant and the clinician in these kinds of interactions. So again, awareness of the communication that the participant is needing is an important characteristic that needs to happen in this kind of interaction. And going along those lines, it's really only through the trust of the community that clinical studies can happen. And so we really need to pay attention to what the community needs in order to feel safe and comfortable in the studies that are being conducted. In our example, where we were required to collect individuals of diverse backgrounds, we met with community groups and identified what they felt would be most useful for them to feel engaged and to feel that we were open to the needs of the communities. And actually, we found different issues in some subsets. For example, the Hispanic people that we interacted with were much more concerned about what the informed consent documents were saying, and they were very interested in participating, but they were also very careful about reading what was written and making sure they completely understood the requirements. And that also means that for Hispanic participation, we had to have native speakers and also allocate sufficient time for them to feel comfortable with the studies that we were conducting. With European Americans, we were finding not much interest in the consent process. And so sometimes we had to sort of push to make sure they understood what the challenges are and the requirements. So I think, you know, Houston's a great place in terms of the environment that we have, the engagement in the community, and the value that can be provided by the clinical studies. We have world-class institutions here. I think it's just we need this ongoing dialogue between the community for the communities that want to participate to express what the barriers are, and for the clinicians to understand and listen to what the community needs. But I think there's tremendous opportunities here, and it's a really wonderful place to be able to interact with all our community members. So,
thank you so much, Dr. Amos, for sharing the perspectives of clinicians when it comes to engaging a diverse population in clinical research. And if we notice, right, all that we've done over the past few hours that we've been in this conference has been heavily tailored specifically towards community members. We are also excited to share that in September 2022, we will be working in collaboration with the Gulf Coast Consortium to present a workshop that will be focused towards biomedical and clinical researchers so that we can also promote diversities when it comes to clinical research. All we've done today is very focused towards community individuals, but we are making conscious step, you know, with this upcoming conference that I'm also very excited about. This is titled Diversity, Disparities, and Community Engagement in Healthcare Research Workshop. So please feel free to save the date. It's going to be on September 13th of 2022, and it has a lot of engaging, you know, thought-provoking sessions that is specifically tailored towards clinicians alike, such that each of us are putting in our own contribution, are putting in our own conscious efforts, so that together we are doing what we can do to address health disparities and close that gap of you know, non-representation in clinical trials. And at this point, I will turn it over to Dr. Loud.
Thank you, Dr. Ajewole. Just want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the Community Engagement Core website, which is your destination for all things CEC. So on our page, you'll find information about who we are, the various disparities we are targeting, as well as the steps we're taking to connect with you, our community. So there you'll also find an electronic version of our Community Impact Magazine, which is an impressive collection of a lot of what you had here today, clinical trial related research, as well as personal experiences of community members who have participated in clinical trials, as well as community-based current events. And this is published 2 times a year. Another highlight of our website is the Community Resource Guide, which is an easy way to access information, credible information about federally qualified health centers, as well as other health-related resources available throughout the greater Houston community to include all 9 counties. And last but not least, the guide provides the information you need about clinicaltrials.gov. This is where you can go to see what research studies are being conducted throughout your area that may align with your interests. If there's any information that we can provide, the CEC is more than happy to also serve as a resource for any questions that you may have that come up after the conference. Thank you so much, and now I'll turn it over to Ms. Casas. for announcements.
Wow, that was so much information that we received today. Now that we have learned so much regarding clinical research, I would like to invite you all to follow us at our social media pages. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn at CEC Texas Southern U, or text us at 855-264-9031. We were live tweeting throughout this conference, so please hashtag us at CBMHR and CREC 2022. We are also going to be posting a link on the chat box. I don't know if you all saw it throughout the conference for a survey that we would love for you all to fill out, just so we can kind of get some feedback from you all and see what you all would like to see for our next year's conference. So we do have the date already for our conference next year. Save the date, April 22nd, 2023, for our upcoming Clinical Research and Engagement Conference. Thank you all so much.
Thanks to everyone. I think the past 3.5 hours or so has been an incredible session, for us to have shared, looking from multiple perspectives, right? Starting here from home, like homegrown content, starting off with our Vice President, Penn Marshall, as well as Dr. Lale, the Senior Associate Vice President for Research and Innovations here at TSU, speaking about the commitment of TSUs to addressing health disparities, as well as walking us through the whole length of what the community should know or ask when it comes to clinical research. We've had incredible sessions, from all our very dynamic and passionate speakers who bring in perspectives from African American, Hispanics, LGBTQ community, right? To be able to have this incredible conversation, as well as that panel session. I think, the abilities for past clinical trial participants to actually reflect and share their own experiences of how everything occurred when they went through clinical research and why they did it. These are very valuable information that we've been able to share with our community this afternoon. And I would say all of this would not have happened without the support and the input from the entire community engagement core team. I want to say a big thank you to everybody on the community engagement core team, starting from my associate directors, Dr. Loud, as well as Dr. Uche Ndefo, and then Evelyn Casas, Dr. Morgan, Dr. Tonisha Taylor, Miss Lena Bean, Dr. Maria Mejia, Miss Sierra Legis, Dr. Roselia, and everyone in the CEC team, under the leadership of myself, that I have the privilege of being the director of the Community Engagement Core, as well as a big thank you to our community members, right? We could put all of this, great content together, but if you all are not, logging in on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube, listening to us, and, joining us as we promote and advocate that we all take this bold step towards addressing the health disparity issues in our community, this event would not have been successful. So we are very grateful, and we appreciate each and every one of you for joining us this afternoon. As Ms. Casas announced earlier, please remember to save the date, April 22, 2023. We will be live again, having our 3rd annual Clinical Research and Engagement Conference. In between now and then, Community Engagement Core hosts monthly health education seminars. And of course, as our community is opening up, we do intend to start having quarterly outreach events so that, we are currently hosting things on Zoom, but we would be more out in the community. So please stay tuned to hear more information regarding all the activities that we have planned out in the future. At this point in time, I would like to say a big thank you again to TSU Jazz Ensemble, who actually, put together 3 great performances. We played the first one at the beginning of the conference, and this is another, performance that was put together in support of today's conference. So a big thank you to the leadership and to everyone in TSU's Jazz Ensemble for putting this content together. And we can please advance to the next slide as we listen and enjoy this great music as we close out in today's conference.